For roughly 3 years, I have been asked on a weekly basis, are you starting a podcast? You should start a podcast. I've started a podcast. It's finally happened. The Tougies Take podcast exists. Started this up kind of on a whim with a buddy of mine, Deej, that some of you guys might know, of course, from Twitch. Now, it was a little bit rushed. I'll admit we still got some of the visual stuff to work on, but in terms of the body of work of what this first podcast was, I thought of no better way to do the season predictions than to have it be this first show. It is a mammoth of a show. I think almost 3 hours in total as we go through all 4 divisions, discussing each team in length, why and why not we think they will be successful. Of course, you can listen to this full podcast right here, right now, or you can also catch us on Spotify. Just search Tougies Take as well. And of course, let me know down in the comments if there is a different way you listen to your podcast, and we'll see what we can do. And of course, as well, taking a bit of a step from Strong Opinion Sports, you'll have the segments as well. If you don't want to listen to this full thing, you only care about the North Division, uploaded alongside this will be, hey, here's my North Division preview where we talked about every single team in that regard. I'll have more info for you guys when it comes down to scheduling, consistency, all of that stuff. Might even do some stuff in regards to the Patreon, but I just wanted to say, this is here. This is it. You've asked for it for long enough. 2021, what a perfect time to start a podcast all these years later. Enjoy.
Do we have an intro? We don't have an intro.
I think we got an intro. This is the intro now.
This is the intro now. I'll put some music behind it. I'll just sample you saying, this is the intro now, several times over, and we'll be good to go.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. This is the intro now.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So this is our sports, but 99% hockey podcast. And today is the day before the NHL season of 2021. To take an allegory from Bleacher Report, the game we're all playing on top of a volcano, hoping it doesn't erupt.
It's already erupted in Dallas, apparently, with the amount of COVID tests. But sure, let's just keep hoping it's just a fluke.
Yeah, don't worry. It's let's see. Because I believe 4 teams are allowing fans: Arizona, Dallas, Tampa, and Florida. Tampa has already recanted, and the 2 of the 3 remaining teams have had their first 2 games postponed. So let's bring in the fans.
How long can that possibly last for? Now, I know we're talking about Dallas and we're talking about Florida, unless Dallas was one of the ones that recanted, but I thought it was Arizona. Correct me if I'm wrong. But how long can that possibly last? What's the over-under? Is there an official betting line somewhere?
What, before a team goes like full Baltimore Ravens?
Before another team is just like, yeah, no, we can't possibly do this.
Oh, I don't know. I say it's going to happen, but then it's going to take some time to sink in. So we'll say a month into the season.
That's a good betting line. I think you will have a holdout. I hate to say it, but it probably would be the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, I mean, well, so what's interesting though, right, is you look at like Panthers owner Vinny Viola, who you would think is like normally publicly. Trump nominated him for the Secretary of Defense position. But then when he was like, oh, it might not be a good idea to affiliate myself with this, he declined the nomination. So I know the Panthers have said they are reconsidering allowing fans, and I know that Vinny Viola is definitely cares about the optics of the situation. And I know they tarped over the first 12 rows at practice yesterday, so that's great. Can't let the fans too close to the ice. Get our players sick.
Have you seen any clips from the ECHL? Because from what I can tell, they do have, the proper social distancing measures going on, but they still have people sitting right next to the glass at these games. It's impressive, really.
I didn't even know they allowed TV cameras into ECHL buildings until just now.
I mean, it might be high school basketball level on your local PBS station quality, but it's still there.
They got one guy filming the scoreboard, and then they're just picturing that in. They're just that's fantastic. Well, that was like last year. One of my friends paid for AHL TV, and just like the amount of time there was just a Zamboni doing nothing on his TV screen was phenomenal.
That's what I've heard. I remember when the Portland Pirates were still a thing. I'm like, I want to do this. And then they had a free preview weekend, and we got a lot of Zamboni cam, a lot of Jumbotron viewing. It's like, I'm not dropping, at that time, hundreds of dollars for the season. And I think it's still pretty pricey, but yeah, it's like, there's just no way this is going to happen. This is ridiculous. And I'm glad to know it's still probably that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I can see Dallas thinking about not allowing fans and recaning. I can definitely see Florida doing it because Tampa led the way, but I cannot see the Arizona Coyotes doing it. Because, even if you look at the precedent that the Arizona Cardinals set, they were like, we don't have enough professional sports teams, and they house the 49ers. And I believe the Coyotes are housing the Sharks as well, if I'm not mistaken.
San Jose right now not allowed to play in their home stadium, so the plan was for them to be in Arizona.
So there's a question: are the Sharks allowing fans? Like, is that a team by team basis,
Sharks
or is it an
draw
arena
more
basis?
fans than the Coyotes?
You know what? That's a phenomenal question. We should take bets on that. From fans in chat, feel free to comment or write in how much money you're willing to bet, along with if you think the Sharks or Coyotes will draw more fans.
I mean, it's not as if the Sharks are that great of a team. I don't know if either are a playoff team. I know we're going to get into that in a little bit here, but I think my money would have to be on San Jose just for the novelty of it.
Yeah, well, so that's the other thing too, is like San Jose is one of those teams where their jerseys are so cool that like everybody that doesn't hate them roots for them.
It's true.
Like they're like the Seahawks of the NFL. Like nobody is like, I hate the Seahawks. Like maybe like somebody whose like house was displaced to build the stadium or the Seahawks play, but nobody like hates the Seahawks. And I feel like the Sharks are the same way. And so I don't know. I think everyone's rooting for him, especially now that, Joe Thornton's gone. They they have some time to rebuild, and they're unfortunately stuck to Erik Karlsson's contract.
For life.
Hopefully Brent Burns figures out how to play hockey again, or maybe the saliva from that cheetah bite has like caused an infection that's just slowly taking away his hockey IQ.
Comes with age.
Like, we don't know. It just comes with age. Resistance to cheetah saliva. It just goes down. I will say that of all the teams that I think is really interesting that we bring up Arizona as well, because Phil Kessel went surprisingly late in my fantasy draft, like the 7th or 8th round.
I'd like to say I'm surprised by it, but he is 33 and he's falling off a little bit. I mean, he'll still get you, he'll still get you the goals. But everything else around it, I say he'll still get you the goals. He went from 27 goals in his last year in Pittsburgh to 14 this past year. So I don't even know if he'll still get you the goals anymore. And that's the thing. For Phil, it's just, you look at the type of player that he is. I don't know if I'd take a bet on him either. I don't know if I would have even drafted him, let alone late.
Yeah, I mean, you could also say that like Taylor Hall's addition was bizarrely detrimental to like every single player on that team for some reason.
It's
where it wasn't in New Jersey, obviously, but like, you know, for some reason, just the second they added Taylor Hall, Phoenix was worse last year.
I appreciate you still calling them Phoenix, and people will get very upset about that, but that's okay. No,
I'm just going by EA alphabetical order.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I guess moving along to changes in the NHL as a whole, we now have new weird divisions.
Sponsored divisions.
Primarily for political reasons.
Primarily for money reasons. I mean, political reasons obviously a big part of it, but if you're talking about the names, money, which is fine. But yeah, political reasons primarily.
Oh, 100%. I've actually never used the Discover card before, and now that the Panthers are part of the Discover card Central Division, I'm considering it.
As someone who has a Discover card, I recommend it.
Oh, fantastic. So let's, I guess we're looking at these divisions, right? I'm looking at a map. And, you know, I gotta say, it seems like they all kind of make sense. And I didn't think they were going to end up making sense. Like, I thought for sure we were going to end up with a weird scenario where, like, Minnesota was in the same division as Florida. And although Minnesota does look very boned geographically, much like the year the Winnipeg Jets were in the same division as the Panthers and the Capitals, I think they did an okay job. All things considered.
Yeah, I don't know how you could have set it up differently, really. I mean, obviously, the big political part of it's the all-Canadian division, our North Division. I forget the sponsor for that. I don't remember if it's Scotiabank or whoever else it is. I remember we have, what are the other divisions? Like you said, we have Discover, we have the Scotia sponsorship there. We have the Mass Mutual Division, which is my favorite by far. I forget the fourth. But obviously the North Division being, you know, the all-Canadian teams for the sake of restricting border travel, which is a very smart move. For the rest of the teams in the States, though, I agree. I mean, I think, you know, you could make the slight argument of should St. Louis and Minnesota be in the West? Does it make more sense to have Dallas in the West instead of the Central? And it probably would. But for the most part, I mean, one of those three teams is kind of going to get boned anyway in terms of having to have that little bit of extra travel. So, I mean, geographically, someone was going to be left out, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. But like I said, I mean, I agree. They did pretty well.
Yeah, I think they just wanted to keep the Texans out of California. I think that was a big part of it.
Damn good call.
All right, so you told me that you had some playoff predictions. The new format is the top four from each division makes it, right? So I guess we'll just go alphabetically. Psych. We'll start with the North Division because they're the easiest to remember. I was going to go alphabetically, and then I forgot my alphabet.
Happens to the best of us.
You know, North, as in the letter A. So we'll start with North. So I guess tell me a little bit about the division preview, what you think is going to happen, and what the top four teams look like, and especially the bottom three teams. I think that's where the comedy is.
It is. Now, I mean, obviously, we'll start off with the obvious team who's on the out looking in, and that's Ottawa. I mean, a lot of people are getting a little bit excited about them, which I understand, but they're still not there. Like, you know, signing Tim Stützle to his ELC, that helps a lot, obviously. I mean, he was fantastic in the World Juniors for Germany, but then a lot of people are getting way more excited than I think they should about Derek Stepan being added to the team. They gave up a second-round pick for him, which, I mean, if you want a competent veteran who can, you know, teach the young guys the way, I don't know if you needed to give up a second-round pick to do it, but I digress.
Yeah, it seems high to me.
I mean, I do like, I mean, they did technically get a second-round pick back in the deal with Tampa that brought Cedric Paquette and Braden Coburn up, which, of course, helped Tampa, because why wouldn't you help Tampa in that situation? I think other teams could still help out Tampa, although somehow they are cap compliant. We'll get to that in a minute. But I don't hate where Ottawa's going. I mean, you know, they signed Dadonov or Dadonov from Florida, who you're obviously very familiar with.
Oh, yeah, we'll talk about that. So I think if there is a strategy that you're going to use in a rebuild, is you switch out your jerseys so that way all of your fans have to buy a new jersey. And then what you do is you add players from the historically bad 2008-2009 Panthers squad in Evgeny Dadonov and then Eric Goodbranson, who's apparently on your top pair.
Yeah, as of the time of recording, Cap Friendly has the Ottawa defense as Shabbat Goodbranson, Riley Zaitsev, that'd be Mike Riley, Braden Coburn, and another former Panther in Josh Brown.
Oh, I forgot all about Josh Brown.
How could you? 6'5". DJ, you know the best part about this? They have 3 6'5" defensemen on their blue line.
They're the John Elway of the NHL, where they just exclusively add tall people because it'll work.
No, I mean, lumbering defenseman it's 2002 all over again. It's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, what's interesting, though, too, is like, I feel like Shabbat will pair very well with a lumbering defenseman. I don't know if that line of thinking necessarily works in the modern NHL, but it certainly did a few years ago, where you basically just had a guy that didn't know how to play offense take the shackles off a guy that barely knew how to play defense, and they were both better for it. And I feel like that's the logic they're going by. I don't think it necessarily works anymore. But if you're going to pick a guy to pair with the offensively minded Shabbat, might as well pick a guy that, you know, has scored almost every career goal on accident. And I say that as probably Eric Goodbranson's biggest fan in the world.
Yeah. I mean, hey, we'll see if it works out. But for Ottawa in general, it's just... You look at the offense, they got a good mix of some younger players, but I really don't have much faith. Like, their fourth line is Cedric Paquette, Artem Anisimov, and Austin Watson. Like, it's just, they're just not there yet. Obviously, I think by far and away the worst team in this division. And they added Matt Murray in goal, which might work out. It's tough to say you don't have faith in a goalie that has 2 Stanley Cups to his name and is still younger than the two of us. But I just don't see it happening. They're getting better. They'll be better than they were last year, but this all-Canadian division did them no favors.
Well, you know, I think Matt Murray is an interesting player for them to add, especially at this point in Matt Murray's career, where like his career has very much paralleled that of Michael Jackson, right? Where at one point Matt Murray was completely on top of the world, and then everybody started to feel weird about the glove.
So moving on to the second, I don't want to say the second last team, because I don't know if I'm necessarily predicting this off of, you know, who's actually, you know, who's going to be the top of the division or whatnot. But we do get to 2 controversial exclusions in terms of who I don't have making the playoffs from the North Division. And I don't have Vancouver making it, which is going to frustrate a lot of people, but allow me to elaborate. Their top line of JT Miller, Elias Pettersson, and Brock Besser is incredible and is legitimately in the running for the best top line in the game right now. But their depth scoring would scare the hell out of me. Your second line is Tanner Pearson, who's okay, Bo Horvat, who's great, and then Nils Höglander. So you're putting a lot of faith in a 20-year-old. And then the bottom 6, Tyler Mott, Jay Beagle, Brandon Sutter, Antoine Roussel, Adam Gaudette, Jake Virtanen. Yikes. Not to mention the amount of money that's tied up in that. I can't put any faith in that offense for them to be able to make it. I just don't really see how a lot of these guys contribute enough to get there. Defensively, they improved. They lost Chris Tanev, but you bring in Nate Schmidt for pennies on the dollar. Still can't really believe Vegas did that, but it worked out for them. They got their target, who they wanted in free agency. You bring in Travis Hamonic as well. At least that's presumed. He's not officially signed yet. And Quinn Hughes is obviously amazing. Alex Edler's still underrated. But the defense is, I'll label it good, solid to good. Certainly not out of place in terms of the other teams in the division in terms of how it compares. And then you have Braden Holtby and Thatcher Demko. And Braden Holtby's someone who has a lot to prove, because he's entered that Carey Price territory for me, where if you look 4 to 5 years ago, he has the legitimate argument for being one of the best, one of the top 2, if not the best goaltenders in the league, but he
100%.
hasn't been that. I mean, there was a time frame. It started in 2012 when he played the Bruins in the first round of the playoffs. The Bruins are defending champions. Looks like they might be able to make another run. And then this guy named Braden Holtby comes out of nowhere. And that was the start of 5 consecutive years of Braden Holtby putting the Bruins over his knee every time he played them. It was brutal, but he hasn't been that in a bit. And Thatcher Demko looked good in the playoffs last year. For the Canucks, it's weird to say last year. I mean, it is obviously 2021 now, but the playoffs ended, 4 months ago? Not even. So, yeah. I don't know. I have too many questions about the Canucks in terms of the depth scoring and the goaltending to essentially put money on the fact that they'd make the playoffs.
Yeah, if I'm looking at Vancouver right now, they remind me a lot of, let's say, Columbus 2 or 3 years ago, where there's a lot of good two-way guys on their team that aren't necessarily offensively talented, obviously outside of their top line. But their defense, although very good, I don't feel like has the follow-through to play that completely shut down, like defensively minded team that Columbus played a few years ago. And their defense core is actually still very young, and I feel like needs a little bit more development. And then, Braden Holtby, like you said, is a question mark. I would even argue at this point that Braden Holtby is a downgrade in net for them over Markstrom.
I think the majority of people are going to. Agree with you on that. I mean, it's funny you compared him to Columbus because I think Travis Green is the coach that could get them to buy in to playing that defensive style that Columbus has played under Tortorella or the Islanders have played under Barry Trotz. But it's tough to say if they could pull it off to the same level. I think that's what they would need to do to get into the playoffs. And like you said, I just don't know if it's there.
Yeah.
So
who else do you have on the outside here in the North Division?
That I have on the outs, and it's very, very close here. I'll say, like, Vancouver, absolutely in the mix. But like I said, the questions over goaltending and the depth scoring, I had to leave them out. And then this other team as well, some questions over depth for me, has to have them on the outside looking in, and it's Calgary. And obviously, Markstrom goes to Calgary. It's a decent little upgrade on who they had. They still have Riddick as their backup, which I like. I think Markstrom's, a fantastic goalie who finally, I mean, obviously, again, you being a Panthers fan, you got to watch him for a while before he went to Vancouver, finally kind of grew into what everyone thought he might be. But I look at the current projected depth chart, and I just don't know if I see it primarily on defense. You have Giordano and Rasmus Andersson, great pairing. Hanifin and Tanev, solid if Tanev can stay healthy. Then you have Juuso Valimaki, who missed a former first-round pick. He missed all of last year due to injury. And Nikita Nesterov, formerly of the Tampa Bay Lightning, who's coming back over to the NHL. I just don't know if that's going to be enough. And then you look at some of the forwards, the fourth line of Lucic, Sam Bennett, and Joachim Nordstrom. I mean, Bennett and Nordstrom are replacement level. There are just some questions about this lineup without that X factor on offense, because there are a lot of questions about Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan, Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, Elias Lindholm as well, really solid player, but you have questions about the superstars or the guys who are supposed to be superstars on this team compared to the other teams that I have making it, that I just couldn't put Calgary in my top 4.
And it's interesting too, like, because when I see Calgary, I think of two things, right? It's really interesting to me what a huge gap the loss of TJ Brody ends up leaving in their defensive core. That solid second pairing guy that you can just count on. That's nuts to me. Completely downgrades their whole defense,
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, and again, you lose Brody. You've lost Hamonic. You do bring in Tanev. I just don't know if it's enough, though.
Yeah, Tanev's not. I mean, Tanev is like, he's Tanev, like you said, injury problems, and he's older. He's been around the league for quite some time. Like I'm pretty sure I've seen him in every variant of Vancouver jerseys since their Cup run.
I think a guy who is stealthily 31 years old.
That's nuts. I like, if you asked me if he was 50, I'd agree with you.
Fair enough. So
the other thing with Calgary, though, too, is like, to me, Calgary on paper, like you have all the pieces, but this is like, I want to see Calgary succeed because they've been putting this together for so long. Like it's becoming very apparent that the Carolina trade that they made in no way worked out in their favor, even though they got a lot of good players back. But they are a team that is capable of topping out in fourth gear when every other team that they're competing with is working with 5 gears.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. And it's funny because you think about that Hamilton trade, and it's like, okay, would you rather have Elias Lindholm and Noah Hannafin or Dougie Hamilton? And you see what Dougie Hamilton's been doing in Carolina. You might still want Dougie Hamilton, especially with Mark Giordano now being 37. How many years does he have left unless he goes full Chara and plays for another 6-7 years?
I mean, he's 1 year removed from a Norris season.
Right.
So it's not entirely, it's not entirely out of the question, but it's not like he's going to get any better at this point.
So top 4 then for the North Division. Everybody knows that at this point, I do have, it's close, but, and we'll start off here. I guess we'll talk about all 4 teams, but I do have Toronto as my number 1 team in the North Division. And then from there, it's a little bit more close with Winnipeg, Montreal, and Edmonton. Who do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's see. So you know what I'll do? I haven't been following the Canadian teams as closely this offseason. It's been a good year to be a Dolphins fan, so I really dove into the NFL this year. So what I'll do is I'll list them off in the order that I think they're going to finish in, right? So obviously Toronto is on top, unfortunately. Yeah. And in second, despite the injury problems, I think this year might be our first year where we have a good shot at seeing McDavid and Draisaitl healthy for an entire year. So I'm going to say that Edmonton finishes second. So let's talk about Edmonton.
All right, cool. So we'll just skip over Toronto entirely. We'll save them for last.
Yeah, we'll save them for last.
Edmonton, right now, the biggest issue for me, on Cap Friendly, I'm not sure about the health status of James Neal or Gaten Haas, who's a solid bottom 6 option. James Neal, obviously, had a bit of a resurgence, at least at the start of last year after coming over from Calgary. Cap Friendly doesn't have the information, so hey, if he's healthy and good to go, cool. The big issue right now with Edmonton is Oscar Klefbom being out for the entire year, and that's the main reason why I think it was that much closer between Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver, and who I thought would make it in. It's tough to overlook losing your best defenseman, but maybe it is just the McDavid and Draisaitl factor, because they do have some depth concerns. I would say like Nugent Hopkins, McDavid, Cassian on your top line's great. Draisaitl with Yamamoto and Dominic Cahoon, who's coming over, I think that's going to be ridiculous. Of course, Cahoon and Draisaitl, the German combination as well, which is pretty cool. Their third line is really interesting, though. It's Josh Archibald, who a lot of people are going to be, okay, whatever. The guy hits like a truck. He just hits everything. He just runs around like a madman. Kyle Turris, who of course was bought out by Nashville, and Jesse Puljujarvi, who's coming back over. So I'm really intrigued because Turris and Puljujarvi, you talk about the players in the league that have the most to prove in this upcoming season, they might be at the top of the list, top 10 minimum.
Yeah, I mean, Turris to me, like his time in Ottawa, he was a bit steadfast, but he's kind of always been a question mark since he decided not to sign with Arizona back in the day. I don't know if or was it Colorado? It was one of the two.
Arizona that he ended up leaving and being traded from. I've traded from.
Yeah, and it just traded from. Yeah, I think he refused. He was a holdout, and then they traded him. But yeah, you look at Turris, and he's this guy that, like, he has the skills and everything to prove, and maybe this is finally the situation where, like, when you're on a team with arguably the 2 best players in the world, and they are capable of running their own lines without stepping on each other's toes and generate scoring, I think you very quickly learn your place in the world, and you learn what you need to put up. And I'm hoping that's a very positive situation for Puljujarvi and Turris.
And I mean, defensively, too, since I mentioned it, like I said, losing Klefbom sucks. But Nurse, Bear, Jones, Adam Larson as a top 4 is pretty good. The third pairing right now is
Yeah.
showing up, though, is Slater Cuckoo and Tyson Barrie. Now, Tyson Barrie's got a lot to prove after coming over from Toronto. Slater Cuckoo is an underrated defenseman, but he's also more offensive. So you have two like offensive style defensemen on the third pairing, which is scary. And then goaltending wise with Koskinen and Smith, it's just mainly with Koskinen, just don't suck. Average level goaltending, this team makes the playoffs. It shouldn't be that difficult to accomplish.
Yeah. That's the Clef. I didn't really weigh the Clefbaum injury in there. But that said, I think over these last 3 seasons, there has not been a single season where Darnell Nurse has not improved, and at some point is talked about as being underrated throughout the season. And so I guess eventually Nurse is going to plateau one of these seasons, and I don't think this one is it. So I don't know. I think Edmonton's going to finish second. You might disagree with me there, but we'll rank them at the end.
It is pretty close. So if we're leaving Toronto for last, who do you have, Winnipeg or Montreal?
Winnipeg or Montreal. So I'm going to put Winnipeg at 3. Okay. For the reason that although Winnipeg has a couple question marks for me. Number one, it seems like they have consistently underperformed for the last 3 years now. And then number two, it's pretty easy to argue that the best player on that team is either going to be Mark Scheifele or Blake Wheeler. And Blake Wheeler, I feel like, is due to regress at some point. He's been around the league for a while. He's a very physical, dominant player. And if that happens, I think the Jets they're in a weird place because they've been underperforming for a while. And if their best player regresses, it won't be good.
Fair enough. So for Montreal then, unless you want to go to Winnipeg, I'm not sure. Either or, we'll figure out the proper. Let's go with Montreal because I think there is a lot more, maybe a lot more to talk about.
I think Montreal. Montreal's the most. Yeah, let's talk about Montreal. They're one of the most interesting teams because they're making the biggest changes.
So top line, Tatar, Deneau, Gallagher, incredible line, especially if Tatar can keep that level of play up. The second line scares me, at least again as Cap Friendly has it as of time of recording. Jonathan Drouin, Nick Suzuki, and Josh Anderson. Jonathan Drouin sucks, or at least has sucked. That Sergachev trade with Tampa looks abysmal, but he's 25 and can still figure it out. And if he figures it out this season, all the more, better for Montreal. Suzuki was pretty damn good for Montreal in the play-in round and in the playoffs, and I'm buying into his hype for sure. And then you have Josh Anderson, who I'm not buying into the hype for. Someone who had a 27-goal season. Last year, major shoulder injury, only scores a goal, and then gets a 7-year deal from the Habs here at $5.5 million per, which is insane to me. But, that second line, it's the wishful thinking line. If Drouin and Anderson can find their game, that top six looks pretty good. But the reason why I buy into Montreal, at least offensively, is their third line. Toffoli and Armia, who are both top six guys on a third line, with Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who also looked really good in the play-in round. And then the fourth line, you have Paul Byron and Arturi Lehkonen, two guys who are much better than being fourth liners, being centered by Jake Evans, who is probably in the best role for him. So I think they have really good depth throughout the lineup because of the moves that they've made and the younger guys that can step into that lineup.
Oh, definitely. I like Nick Suzuki a lot, but I like the Flash. So I am a Jesperi Kotkaniemi fan, and I'm excited to see what he's capable of in a contract year. Having him on the third line, I think is a good place to start, but I think he finishes top six, and I think we're going to see some cool stuff from Kotkaniemi this year.
I hate to say it, but obviously I do tend to agree with you there based on having Montreal in the playoffs. And then defensively, it's interesting. Ben Sherratt and Shea Weber. Weber's still great. I think even at being 35 years old, a lot of people still kind of forget how good Shea Weber is. Sherratt's okay. He's boosted up by Weber. They brought in Joel Edmondson for the sake of size. I think he's a third pairing guy, but he's with Jeff Petrie, who might still be one of the most underrated defensemen in the league. And then the third pairing is interesting because they have Brett Kulak, who is one of the most underrated defensemen in the league. I think someone who could, be a solid second pair defenseman for most teams in the league, but he's next to Alex Romanov, who it's been a while. I mean, obviously, like you've had guys drafted, say first round or whatever, or top 5 in the draft in the past couple of years, where people are just like, this guy's going to be great. But the hype around Romanov, and maybe it's just because of the size of Montreal's fan base, but it's been a while since we've seen somebody this hyped, and I am kind of buying into that. And then you got the Carey Price and Jake Allen effect, which I'll say this. It's well documented. I don't think Carey Price is as good as he used to be. Whether or not that's due to, a lot of people would say it was the defense in front of him, which I think was incredibly insulting to guys like Weber, Petrie, and Kulak, or whether it was just because he was being overplayed or the injuries or whatever. But you get Jake Allen, who is a risk in and of himself, but someone who was incredible last year as a backup. I think if you just if Jake Allen can live up to what he needs to do, if he can play to that level and allow Carey Price to play fewer games, I think we're going to see Carey Price get that much closer to what he used to be. And that was the X factor for me, having Montreal in the playoffs over Calgary and Vancouver. Even with Calgary having Markstrom, like I said, that the defense for Calgary was just a bit too questionable for me. So I don't hate the Montreal lineup really throughout any of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Montreal lineup looks interesting. Something that's interesting to me is having two veterans that I think could start on any other team in Corey Perry and Michael Frolik on your taxi squad. I think that's fascinating to start the year with.
I mean, neither were
I don't know what that says to
waivers either. Neither got picked up.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that says that guys like Suzuki and Kotkaniemi, even like Lehkonen, are starting to take that step forward where that veteran presence isn't necessarily needed on the night in, night out lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good factor as well. It's something we haven't talked about a lot too, is I would say the taxi squad and the depth factor with that, but I think we're just mainly trying to prioritize who's actually going to be on the team. That's confirmed now at this point that these rosters are set.
All right, so let's talk about Winnipeg.
I'll take things no one's ever said for 1,000, Alex. So Winnipeg, I really do like this Jets lineup, even without Brian Little, whose career is probably over. Unfortunately, it's a real shame there. You mentioned Blake Wheeler, and obviously if someone's going to take a step back, but Eller, Scheifele, Wheeler, Connor, Stastny, Laine is a tremendous top 6, even with all the controversy around whether or not Laine is going to be dealt. For now, you just have to take the team for what it is. I love that top 6. You have Andrew Kopp and Adam Lowry, who are two of the best third-line players in the league. Some questionable depth, throughout the bottom 6 from there. Mason Appleton, Matthew Perreault, Nate Thompson. Trevor Lewis might be slotted in. He's not currently under a contract. But defensively, I think is the big improvement for them because, like you mentioned, they kind of slipped. They missed their window a little bit with Byfuglien, Myers, Trouba on the team. Although, in hindsight, with how we've seen Tyler Myers and Jacob Trouba perform on their new clubs with those massive contracts, I think Winnipeg dodged a bullet, personally. But Josh Morrissey is a really good defenseman at this stage. You have Neil Pionk as well, who a lot of Rangers fans like to hate on when that deal happened, but I do like Neil Pionk as well. And Dylan DeMello, despite being slotted in on the third pair right now for what looks like opening night, a very underrated defenseman who I think, is going to fit in very well with this team. So you have a situation on defense there where you have some guys who just need to be with Tucker Poolman, Derek Forbort, and Nathan Beaulieu. These are guys who just need to be okay. And that defense is looking better than it's looked in the past couple seasons with, in my opinion, the best goaltender in the league right now, Connor Hellebuck, behind them.
I'd agree. And I think Hellebuck is the guy this year. I think going into the season, he definitely looks like the Vezina favorite, especially with somebody that's been dominant lately and who I would have said that the favorite is in Ben Bishop going down. And then, Tampa appears to be taking a step back. So Hellebuck to me looks like he is the guy in the league this year. And it helps that if I'm looking on paper, Winnipeg appears to be a heavy puck possession team going into this year. And that, traditionally that only helps out your goaltender, So I'm excited to see what kind of numbers Helbig can put up this year.
Absolutely. So again, had to have Winnipeg in the playoffs, but as we talked about with Toronto, they have to be the top team on paper. And obviously there are some questions with the team. Right now it's looking like it's going to be Joe Thornton, Matthews, and Marner on the top line, which is incredibly interesting. Obviously, super weird to see Joe Thornton in Toronto to begin with, wearing the number 97 of all things.
Oh, yeah.
But, he's next to Matthews and Marner. He doesn't have to do that much to be successful, in theory at least. And it's still Joe Thornton. He's 41, but he's still a very capable playmaker. The second line, you have John Tavares, William Nylander, which is a recipe for success right there. But Jimmy Vesey is on the second line right now, which maybe he'll finally reach that potential everyone thought he was going to have when it was, oh my God, he's not signing, I think, with Nashville. Where's he going to go? The third line might be the best third line in hockey, Mikheyev, Kerfoot, Hyman. And then the fourth line, I think, is really got the potential to be solid as well. You have Jason Spezza, new acquisition, Wayne Simmons, who I don't think he's what he used to be, but will be kind of that good locker room guy, the big physical presence type of thing. And Alex Barabanov, who's coming over from the KHL. Looks like he's made the team at this stage. But I think we both and really all kind of know it's the defense that's really stepped up. You have Riley and now TJ Brody, Jake Muzzin, Justin Hall, Travis Dermott, and Zach Bogosian has actually made it, which I don't know what that says about Rasmus Sandin not making it. They also have Mikko Lehtinen, who's on the taxi squad still. So that defense has improved. I love the goaltending with Anderson, Campbell, and even Aaron Dell. At this point, like, something's got to give with Toronto. If this team can't win a playoff round, I don't know what the hell you do.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, right? Because I remember 2 years ago, I was listening to NHL radio on Sirius XM. And it was at that point, this was the year the Blues won the Cup, and it was at that point where they actually had the worst record in the league. I remember because they were tied with the Panthers for the worst record in the league. And
I don't like to talk about that year, but it's okay.
Well, so the thing they said on the radio, they were like, if this doesn't work this year, like, you've got O'Reilly, you've got Tarasenko, like, you've got a team that can win it. And you have the worst record in the league.
Oh, there were to cut you off. There were absolutely rumors that Vladimir Tarasenko was going to be traded if they didn't make the playoffs that year.
Yeah, there were rumors about Parayko, Tarasenko, like, everybody was going to be traded. Like, they were ready to blow it up. They were probably 2 games away, I will say, from blowing it up. So what's interesting, though, is I think if Toronto can't do it this year, I think there's not a lesson to be learned from the Blues and not blowing it up. I think Toronto will actually have a situation on their hands, and it won't be a matter of faith. I think it'll just be a matter of, you can't give 3 players a $10 million salary and build a balanced team, but maybe this is the year that Toronto proves us wrong.
That was a thing too that a lot of people said when we got into this era of the big contracts again. You look at Kane and Taves getting the big money in Chicago, and since then, for a lot of reasons, but it hasn't worked. We might be looking at the same thing here.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's the thing, it's just like, this is such a dumb argument, and I'm shooting myself in the foot for saying it, but the NHL is not the NBA. You're just one player cannot influence the game to the same level as an NBA player can, and you got to spend your money wisely.
So, next division then, shall we?
Next division, alphabetically, that would be East. Let's talk about the East division.
Tremendous. So, obviously, the difference here, 8 teams instead of 7. I'll leave it up to you because obviously I don't think we want to spend too much time, dissecting every team. We still got, a long way to go with this preview. But I'll just say this. For the East, my 4 playoff teams, controversial as it may be, Philadelphia, Boston, Washington, and Pittsburgh.
Interesting. All right, so let me see. Okay, so what I will do is I will say that you know what? I think I agree with you. The East is such a rough division. It's a very difficult one to call, and I think the winner of this division ends up being Boston or Washington. I think it's a coin flip either way. Both teams have been on fire for the last 3 years. Philadelphia has been building something special. They are consistently hitting on prospects, and Claude Giroux has not slowed down at all. You can't count out Sidney Crosby. I mean, I don't want to say he's the Tom Brady of the NHL, but at this point he kind of is. Like, he's the older veteran that you can count on whenever you need him. But what's interesting is the outside looking in. It's so hard to say that the Islanders aren't going to keep playing their game where they are heavy defensively, and they've got 2 or 3 guys that can consistently get one past your goaltender, no matter how good of a game you're having.
That was the tough call for me, is do I go with Pittsburgh or New York? So I guess we'll just talk about those 2 teams now. So
yeah, I think that's a great thing.
The big thing for me with Pittsburgh is, you look at their top line, you get a healthy Jake Gensel back, which is huge. Jake Gensel is a phenomenal player in this league. He's next to Crosby, which is outstanding. The second line, Jason Zucker, Evgeny Malkin, Brian Rust. I love that line as well. Third line, I hate to bring up a former Panther having success, but Jared McCann with Brandon Tanev, who, say what you want about the kind of crazy contract and the even more ridiculous player photo, still a really solid player with Mark Jankowski. The fourth line, it's okay. I mean, Lafferty, Bluger, and Sevier, I guess it's fine. But I do think defensively they're a little bit more interesting than some people give them credit for. I do really like Brian Dumoulin. I still think Crystal Tang's phenomenal. John Marino was incredible last year, and I don't think he's going to slow down. And
I love John
Marino.
Marino.
Know how anybody could, unless you're an Oilers fan, to know you gave him up for absolutely nothing when it looked like he wasn't going to make it. So you add in Marcus Pettersson as well. You get to the 2 question marks of Michael Matheson and Cody Ceci. But I look at those pairings, Matheson with Marino, and I say, yeah, I don't think Michael Matheson's going to be the guy to just consistently try to go up the ice and be more offensive. I think that's kind of a way to shelter him a little bit.
So you say that, but as a guy that has seen Mike Matheson play in person for, I don't know, we'll say 200 NHL games probably at this point, I think this is the year Marino takes a step back.
And they just let Matheson go for it?
No, I think Matheson, like, Matheson is so bad that he will drag Marino down. Like, I watched firsthand. Like, if we're like advanced stats, right? We look at guys that are not necessarily household names but are elite, like Weegar and Marino. I watched them try and put Weegar with Matheson, and I saw that experiment implode horrifically. And I think John Marino is a very, very, very good defenseman. I don't know what happened, but at some point, Mike Matheson's hockey IQ just disappeared. And he was so promising for so long. And I really hope he turns it around. I hope it's just New Jersey will help him. But him, every time he was on the ice, I knew that something bad was going to happen. And that's just, I mean, unfortunately, you never want a player on the ice that makes your fans nervous. And that's who Matheson was for the Panthers.
They have 2 of those guys, Matheson and Ceci. So maybe I'm going a little bit, it's a little bit of a reach with this pick, but I just can't help. But look at some of the other aspects of the team. I will say, too, with forwards, if Aston Reese and Kasperi Kapanen sort out their issues, Aston Reese injured. I don't know if he'll be back. I don't remember when the injury was picked up, in fairness. And Kasperi Kapanen right now is just in quarantine, so he'll be fine, hopefully. But, then you look at the goaltending. I am banking on Tristan Jarry still doing what he's done. And I think Casey DeSmith, prior to being in the AHL last year, because you had the situation with Murray and Jarry where DeSmith was the one you could send down, I still think he's an NHL caliber backup. So maybe I am banking on certain things going right for Pittsburgh a little bit too much, but they did have some things that I just don't think the Islanders necessarily have.
Yeah, Pittsburgh, you got Sid, you got Malkin. It's going to take some serious mechanical failures of your team to not make the playoffs.
So the Islanders then, just to talk about why I didn't think they were going to make it. I mean, I do like their top 6 a lot. Lee, of course, they signed Barzell and Eberle. Beauvillier is amazing. Nelson and Bailey are still really good. From there, though, I'm not quite sure. Michael Dowcole, he's not going to be that, amazing top 6 guy you thought he was going to be when you drafted him in the top 10. But Pajot was a really good pickup. He looked great in the playoffs. And then you have Kiefer Bellows there, who, is going to be a rookie, all things considered. So, I don't know about that. And then the fourth line, Matt Martin, fresh off of this new 4-year deal, Cal Clutterbuck, Casey Cizikas. I do like Casey Cizikas. I mean, they fit the bill of what a Lou Lamoriello team looks like and what, the kind of player that can succeed under a Barry Trotz lineup. But,
yeah,
you factor that in. You look at the defense, which lost Devon Taves for picks, which I think is a big loss. I mean, Pelech and Kulak is great. Letty Mayfield, solid. Green and Dobson, we'll see. Andy Green's 38. Noah Dobson's looked okay in limited time, but he's 21. I look at that and I see that as kind of maybe not as big of a concern as what you have in Pittsburgh with Matheson and Ceci. And then you have the goaltending. I really like Semyon Varlamov, and he's thrived in this new system. Ilya Sorokin, I mean, I know a lot of people are really banking on it because you looked at the Russian 3 of 3 to 4 years ago of Ilya Samsonov in Washington, Igor Shesterkin in New York, and obviously Ilya Sorokin with the Islanders. And so far, the other two have adapted, but we still don't know. What are the odds that all 3 are actually NHL caliber goaltenders? Maybe the odds are a little bit higher there, but I just look at the team and I'm like, okay, the goaltending, is it that much better for the Islanders? Not really. The defense, is it that much better for the Islanders? I'd call it about even. So it comes down to Pittsburgh having the more offensive firepower versus the Islanders' defensive system. And what do you think is going to win out? And I went with the Crosby factor.
Yeah, I think Matt Barzal is elite. He's the best player on this team. He is not on the same level as Crosby or Malkin. I mean, he might even put up better numbers as Crosby or Malkin, but there's the factor, like you said. And as far as Sorokin goes, I think he's going to put up insane numbers. I think you would have to be a remarkably bad goaltender to not put up an amazing GAA in this Barry Trotz system of perimeter play, players that are very difficult to play against. I think this team is set up for goaltender success. And when you have a veteran with very good positioning like Varlamov, he's going to look like the best goalie in the NHL behind the Islanders. And hopefully a prospect of Sorokin's level will step right in and continue that tradition.
I think that very well could be the case. So to, I guess, quickly talk about then the 3 teams that don't have making it in the East: Buffalo, the New Jersey Devils, and probably the most controversial one is the New York Rangers. We'll start things off, I guess, with Buffalo. Look, they've improved for sure. You added Taylor Hall. Obviously, Jack Eichel's still great. Victor Olofsson looks great. Sam Reinhart is underrated. You added Eric Stahl for Marcus Johansson, which I get it. Eric Stahl's 36. The wheels are falling off a little bit, but he is still a really solid player. It looks like Jeff Skinner is going to be on the third line, which is interesting for a $9 million player with Curtis Lazar, who's good for him, hanging around the league. He's an option. And then Dylan Cousins, of course, 19-year-old former first-round pick here. It looks like he's made the team too. They have improved from last year. I think their defense is actually pretty solid. McCabe, Ristolainen, say what you want defensively, but McCabe's there to kind of safety net. Rasmus Dahlin's only going to get better. Brandon Montour is okay. Colin Miller's kind of regressed a bit, but he's okay, and Yoki Haru's fine. I just can't have that much faith in an Allmark-Hutton pairing, and there's some other questions in that lineup with like depth scoring and everything. They've improved. I just don't have them as a playoff team yet.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think you're right. Dahlin's only going to get better. It's crazy to think that Dahlin is still not legal drinking age. I feel like he's been in the league forever, but he, 3 years under his belt. I think last year was really the first year where I could look at Dahlin and be like, oh, that's somebody you don't mess with. Like, he can make a big difference. But yeah, you're right. Carter Hutton, he might not exactly be, I believe the pun people use is starter Hutton. And then Ullmark. So maybe this may be the year that we see the rise of Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen.
It's true, and I hope so for the sake. And there are some fantastic Finnish goaltenders coming up, and he might be my favorite for the sake of the name.
Yeah, he certainly has the best name in the entire league. It's not
Right.
even close. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen.
Obviously, then we had New Jersey as well, who I don't think will make it. And I feel like that one's fairly obvious. The big story for them, of course, Corey Crawford signs and then retires. I don't think it's worth speculating on what's going on. You just look at a 10-year career, a two-time Cup champion, and say that was a heck of a career. But it does leave the Devils in a pretty rough spot. You're looking at Mackenzie Blackwood, who's very good, but you're looking at Scott Wedgwood or Eric Comrie as a backup, and that's not something I'm willing to bank on. I do like their defense. I don't like that guy in the background. I do like their defense with the acquisition of Ryan Murray. If he can stay healthy, he's phenomenal. PK, you got to hope would bounce back. Damon Severson's solid. Dmitry Kulikov's solid defensive defenseman. Will Butcher's still good. Sammy Vatanen will probably play instead of Connor Carrick. Maybe not. But I just look at that forward core. You look at the goaltending, the massive hit of losing Crawford. The defense is solid, but forward-wise right now, I don't know how you could bank on it. It is such a young team. The top line, Yegor Sharangovich, a Belarusian, Jack Hughes, and Kyle Palmieri. Sharangovich, 22, Jack Hughes is 19. Second line, Andreas Johansen coming over from Toronto. I like that pickup. Pavel Zacha and Nikita Gusev. That should be a pretty good line. Third line, Miles Wood, Travis Zajac, and 22-year-old Jesper Boqvist should be okay. And then the fourth line right now, Yanni Kuokkanen, Mike McLeod, and Nathan Bastian. Two 22-year-olds and a 23-year-old. There's just way too much unproven talent to think that this team can make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's really not a good sign for your team's depth when you have three guys that are still developing sitting on your fourth line where you would otherwise shelter a player to help them learn defensively. I think when you look at this team, the only player on offense above the age of 30 is Travis Zajac. I mean, even Gusev still feels like a rookie because he hasn't been in the league very long. Like, this is such a young team. I do think that for a guy like Hischier and Jack Hughes, who has supposedly put on some muscle, I think this is the year where they need to prove to the Devils GM that, hey, you are building something special and you're not going to get stuck in that rut where you miss the playoffs just barely every year. And people would be like, oh, you guys have a real bright future ahead of you. And I think that the Devils have been miserable for long enough that that is a trap that they could very well fall into.
And I should mention Nico Hischier, currently listed as injured day-to-day. Jesper Bratt as well, who just signed a new deal, has visa issues going on right now. Sammy Vatanen does as well. So those two will be in their lineup for the forward core. So you might not see like McLeod or Bastian make it. But the point remains, Nico Hischier's really good. 22 years old. So is Jesper Bratt, also really good. But that talent level is just not there right now.
Yeah. They haven't shown that fifth gear yet. So Devils still a work in progress. Hopefully they continue to progress.
And then we get to the most controversial pick. It has to be the New York Rangers. And I know a lot of people are going to be furious because a lot of people are really buying in to the Rangers hype. And I understand why. You know, you look at this team, Kreider, Zibanejad, Buchnevich. Tremendous top line. Kreider, obviously, if he's on his game, Zibanejad was phenomenal last year. Buchnevich is that perfect kind of partner in crime. He's not going to be the name on the marquee, but he is the type of guy that you need next to your superstar if you're going to have success. The second line right now is shaping up as Panarin, Strome, and Kaapo Kakko. Panarin is a bona fide superstar, and obviously Kaapo Kakko's rookie year was miserable, but he'll hopefully be better. Ryan Strome, who knew, pretty solid option. That trade for Ryan Spooner is looking pretty good. And then the third line, Lafreniere is the big X factor here. But I just don't think even with his offensive contribution, it makes up for the lack of depth in other areas, which we'll talk about in a second. Philip Hedl is okay. Julien Gauthier, I don't know if he's an NHLer right now. I mean, he's going to have to step up. And a fourth line, Brendan Lemieux, Kevin Rooney, two decent NHL options. Brett Howden's okay, still young. It's kind of the same thing as New Jersey. A lot of young, unproven talent at forward. But the big issue for me is this defense. And I saw it on Twitter, actually, before we started recording this, that, it's an all-American defense. That doesn't mean it's a good defense, at least not yet. Your top pairing is shaping up to be Ryan Lindgren and Adam Fox, two 22-year-olds. Fox is incredible. but still 22-year-olds. Your second pair is Keandre Miller, who looks great, but he's 20, and Jacob Trouba, who, I'm sorry, is one of the worst contracts in the NHL right now, in my opinion, at $8 million a season. Just isn't worth that unless he can kind of get his game together. And then your third pairing might be the worst pairing, the worst defensive pairing in the league. It's Jack Johnson and Tony DeAngelo. I still don't understand the Jack Johnson signing at all. Maybe he figures it out, but he's 33, and people have been saying maybe Jack Johnson will figure it out for a decade. And then Tony DeAngelo, a great offensive defenseman. Him getting turnstiled by Sebastian Aho in the play-in round last year wasn't a fluke. The only thing Tony DeAngelo is worse at than defense is social media. And then you look at the goaltending.
Well said.
Then you look at the goaltending with Shesterkin and Georgiev. I do really like Alex Georgiev. I think he's been worthy of, getting a chance to be at least a part of a full-time tandem in this league for a season now. Shesterkin was really good in the 12 games he played. I think he played one play-in round game. So he has 13 games under his belt at 25 years old.
Yeah, it's important to remember that Georgiev is younger than Shesterkin. Yeah, it's nuts. Like Shesterkin, like he feels like he was just drafted because you just haven't seen him play a bunch of NHL games. And like, maybe Georgiev actually ends up being the better goaltender. He's certainly bared more responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So it's a really young lineup, a really unproven lineup. I get why people are excited because the kids are playing. And we know 3 years ago for the Rangers, it was, and I completely agree with ownership and management. They did the right thing. They said, hey, look, we could make the playoffs this year, but let's be honest, it's not going to happen. Let's turn this around. And all of the sudden now, this lineup is poised in the next couple of years to be a extremely dangerous team to face in the playoffs. They're just not at that point where I think they make the playoffs yet, though.
Yeah, I think, it's really interesting. Like, if we look at Mika Zibanejad's stats for a second, he, in my opinion, is the most underrated. He's the only superstar in the league that isn't regularly thought of as an NHL superstar. Like, there's probably 10 teams in the league that have a player better than Mika Zibanejad. And, to me, it looks like the thing that might shoot the Rangers in the foot is they have so much offensive talent. It almost seems like they're being a little too conservative with their initial line combinations. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it really is tough to say, right? You have that much young talent. It's a hell of a problem to have. If I'm not mistaken, obviously Capo Caco, Lafreniere, I think Gauthier was a first-round pick. Filipino was a first-round pick. Brett Howden was a first-round pick of Tampa. He came over in the McDonough deal. There is just so much offensive firepower there, but like I said, young team, and how are you going to fit all of them into that lineup properly? So, to get to then the other three teams that we both had making the playoffs, right? Because we already talked about Pittsburgh and the Islanders. So we have Philly, Boston, and Washington. Who are we talking about first?
You know what? I think Washington and Boston we should talk about back to back. So let's get Philly out of the way.
Funny you say that because I have Philly winning this division. I know you said you had Boston and Washington kind of up there with Philly a little bit behind them. I have Philly winning this division.
I don't think that's a hot take by any means. Philly is interesting as they've like homegrown some players that have really stepped up and turned into exactly what they were hoping would be.
So, like you said, top line, Claude Giroux is still a superstar in this league. There is not a team that is not better if Claude Giroux's on their top line. Kevin Hayes and then Joel Farabee, who, one of those homegrown talents, like you mentioned. Kevin Hayes, still don't know if he's worth over $7 million a year, but looked pretty damn good in the playoffs for the Flyers. And then Farabee, of course, he's 20. He's going to keep getting better, especially playing with two guys like that. This second line.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you add a guy like Kevin Hayes, and it very much, he has learned to Wayne Simmons as Wayne Simmons has forgotten how to Wayne Simmons, if that makes sense at all.
The second line, Lindblom, who, thank God, he's healthy and ready to go, with Sean Couturier and Travis Konechny. I think Sean Couturier is not necessarily underrated because people know how good he is. I would take there aren't too many players that say, and like this trade would never happen, for example, but like if I could pick one guy, I mean, obviously, you'd probably pick someone like Connor McDavid. The point I'm trying to make here, long way about it, Sean Couturier is incredible. Absolutely incredible. And it's like, man, if you could hey, pick someone to replace Bergeron who plays like Bergeron, I would pick Sean Couturier. He is that that good. And then you have Travis Konechny on that line as well. That is probably the best second line in hockey, to the point where I know they've slowed down a bit. You have James Van Riemsdyk and Jakub Voracek on your third line with a returning Nolan Patrick, who hopefully is healthy and can kind of get his development back on track. And a fourth line of Michael Raffl, who's solid, Scott Laughton, former first-round pick, who at 26 finally looks like the world beater people thought he might be. He was incredible in the playoffs. And then Nicolas Aube-Kubel, who 24, finally turning it on as well. I can't find a weakness throughout these four lines.
No, definitely not. There's nobody that you could add to this team that wouldn't hold them back with some sort of learning curve into the system. Like, this team right off the bat looks like they're going to come out firing on all cylinders. They've got everything they need.
And I mean, defensively is where it might be a tiny bit shaky. Provorov and Braun, one of those combinations where it's like, all right, Braun stays back, Provorov gallops. Sanheim and Phil Myers. I'm not buying into the Myers hype just yet. We'll see if he can hit that potential. He's 23, but Travis Sanheim at 24 is spectacular. And then that third pairing is probably the one weakness I see. Like, Robert Haig is like a replacement level defenseman, but Shane Gostisbehere is out. I don't know for how long, but they signed Eric Gustafsson, who is a tremendous offensive defenseman. So you put him with Robert Haig, who allows Gustafsson to gallop. I can see it working here. So their biggest weakness isn't as glaring as the biggest weakness for some other teams, say like New York. And then you have Carter Hart and Brian Elliott in goal, which is one of the better tandems. And obviously Carter Hart, you're going to bank on him getting even better this year.
I mean, I know we said earlier that Hellbuck is the best goalie in the NHL, but if there is a guy that's right on his heels, Carter Hart is something special. Like, you watch him, he makes a difference. He's not one of those goalies where you have to look at his stats to know how good he is. He's the rare eye test goalie, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, though, because you can look at him and say, okay, Carter Hart's going to be amazing, and now it's at the point where it's just like, and he's going to be even better. Like, we just keep going with that trend of being like, yeah, Carter Hart's going to be great, because as good as he's been already for a 22-year-old goalie, we know he's going to get better.
Yeah, it's nuts. And then I've also, I mean, even though he's injured, we touched on it briefly, I've got to shout out Shane Gostisbehere, because he's the only other person I've ever met in my entire life that was born in Margate, Florida, like myself. So shout out to Shane Gostisbehere, being near the same remote hospital.
Nice. And someone who gets a little bit more hate from Flyers fandom than he deserves. But we've seen that with the Philadelphia Eagles, that, boy, once you have your sights set on you, there's no hope for you.
Yeah. I mean, that fan base is not to be messed with. That's how I would describe the Flyers fans.
So the last two teams, I guess, that we have technically in our Eastern Conference side of things, if I'm not mistaken, the North and the East would be on the same side of the bracket. Boston and Washington. Who are we going with?
Let's start with Washington, and then we'll finish with the team that you know best.
So obviously, Washington is a little bit more difficult for me to talk about now for emotional reasons. But like you said, ever since winning the Cup, even before then, like, Washington has been a consistently good team for over a decade now. And, they got the one Cup out of it. And I still think they're primed for a potential Cup run here, barring one big concern. The obvious concern being in goal, where Henrik Lundqvist won't be playing. Again, heart condition, recently had surgery on it, and the hope obviously for him isn't whether or not he comes back and plays hockey, it's just whether or not he's going to be able to have a happy, healthy life from this point on at 38 years old. But it puts the pressure on 23-year-old goaltender Ilya Samsonov, and then Vitek Vanacek, if I'm saying that properly, is behind him, a 25-year-old goalie who doesn't have that much experience. that is the big glaring issue with this team. Forwards and defense, I don't think there is a weakness. I mean, top line of Ovechkin, Backstrom, Oshie, one of the best in the league. Vrana, Kuznetsov, Wilson, also phenomenal. Again, Kuznetsov is abysmal defensively, but pairing with Vrana and having let's be honest, there's some positions where or player types where you'd be like, oh, he's a good two-way player. He's more of a power forward, playmaker. Tom Wilson's player type is dick. So you have two great skilled players in Vrana and Kuznetsov alongside one of, if not the best dicks. Let's go with best dicks in the league. There you go, Tom Wilson. That's something you can put on a Twitter bio. But the bottom six as well is incredibly solid. Panik, Eller, Cherry, Hagelin, Dowd, Hathaway. Again, no real weaknesses here. And then the defense is the most stacked defense in terms of depth, I'd say, in the league. You have Orlov, who is one of the best defensemen in the league, with John Carlson, who's one of the best offensive defensemen in the league. Brendan Dillon and Justin Schultz, a little bit worried about Justin Schultz, but he should be able to, now that he's taken a little bit of step back and roll, be solid. And then the third pairing is Nick Jensen, who's great, and Zdeno Chara, who is still more than capable. And on IR, you have Michael Kempney, but for healthy scratches, you have Trevor Van Riemsdyk and Jonas Siegenthaler, who are both NHL caliber defensemen. Like, they're so stacked defensively. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and especially, almost every defenseman on this team, minus Chara, is around 30 years old. And so to have a player like Jonas Siegenthaler at 23 is pretty good for the Capitals, because their roster is got to be one of the older ones in the league. They're very much firing on all cylinders in win now mode. But also worth noting, Alex Ovechkin weirdly in a contract year. I don't think that will change his performance, but it's interesting to talk about.
That is the big cloud looming overhead, I would say, is definitely what is going to happen with Ovechkin. Jakub Vrana's deal is up as well. So Ilya Samsonov, depending on how he performs this year, he's on the last year of his ELC. So I'm intrigued to see, how it plays out. I will say, though, as well, while it looks like Vanacek has won that backup spot, Craig Anderson's still listed on the training camp. The only player listed on the training camp kind of section of the cap friendly at the moment. If you get Samsonov and Anderson, I might say this team wins this division.
Yeah. I think 23 years old, that's when goalies turn into starters. So let's see if Samsonov has it in him.
All right. And then to round out these first two divisions, and I guess this conference, we have Boston, who
the
Bears, who hopefully if you want to introduce a group of kids to a sport, you show this Bears in hockey as opposed to the Bears in football. I still can't believe they're like, yeah, hey, let's get kids introduced to football, to the NFL, by showing them the Chicago Bears. Still,
let's have Anthony Miller punch a guy on Nickelodeon.
Incredible. But this Bruins lineup, the big issue for the most part is David Pasternak's probably going to miss the first month due to injury. But obviously, you still have Marchand and Bergeron on the top line with Jack Studnicka, who 21 has looked really good at times. I think their second line, if they stay healthy, is one of the best in hockey with DeBrusk, Krejci, and Andre Kasha, who we didn't really get to see last year because, again, injury-prone guy, but great when he plays. Their third line, I want to say, has the potential to be one of the best in hockey. Nick Ritchie needs to improve this fan base in a big-time way. But Charlie Coyle, I love, someone who's going to replace David Krejci as the second-line center probably at the end of this year. And then I think Craig Smith was a phenomenal pickup for that third line. I think Coyle and Smith are going to be great together. And then the fourth line of Anders Bjork, who's a defensive specialist but looks really good. Sean Corelli, Chris Wagner, both solid, replacement-level players, the type of guys, of course, that aren't going to impact the score sheet tremendously, but do have those qualities that people love with the eye test, the grit, the heart, etc. The big issue here is the defense, because we know goaltending, it's Raskin, Halak, they're going to be great.
Yeah, they're going to be solid. Defense, we have some subtractions.
Yes, Chara's out. Torrey Krug is out, and it's by design. Chara saying, hey, I would have stayed, but they wanted a younger group. Torrey Krug was apparently never really talked to. So this is it for Don Sweeney, I would say. I mean, you get probably 2 seasons to see if this works out for you. And if it doesn't, I don't know if he sticks around. But you have Jeremy Lauzon, who's looked really good in camp, but what's that even mean? Not much. Next to Charlie McAvoy, who at 23 I still say is one of the best defensemen in the league. You have, I honestly think, one of the best shouts for best second pair in the league with Matt Grzelcyk and Brandon Carlo, both incredibly defensively responsible players. And in this third pairing, Jakub Zboril and Kevin Miller. Jakub Zboril, of course, you might remember from the 2015 draft, where he was the first of 3 consecutive picks made by the Boston Bruins. Of course, Jake.
Oh, I remember that because I was at that draft. Fantastic day to be a Florida Panthers
where you
fan.
Guys selected what? Lawson Krause 2 picks before?
We selected negative contract.
A funny thing is, not that much worse than the Bruins, I guess, if you look at it, because, of course, I mean, God, I could talk about the 2015 draft for a while, but it was Zboril, DeBrusk, and then Senyshyn. Senyshyn, of course, on waivers because he didn't make the team. That was, and of course, we don't have to talk about the fact that Matt Barzal, Kyle Connor, and Thomas Chabot were the next 3 picks after that. But point is, it's make or break for Zboril, and then he's next to Kevin Miller, who is a really solid, defensive defenseman, incredibly tough to play against. But he's 33, coming off of a ridiculous amount of downtime due to injury. He missed all of the 1920 season and only played 39 games in 18-19. So, yeah, a lot of questions there defensively.
Yeah. This, I think, and that's the thing too, is I think it's going to take some time for this group to gel. But luckily, you got players like Krejci and Bergeron that are capable of very securely setting up your team defensively to the point where I think that's going to take a little bit of pressure off of this D-core. And that's why I have Boston still rated so high. I mean, you got elite goalies, you got elite 2-way forwards. I mean, your defense can take its time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, it's not to disrespect the Islanders, but again, with they might already, the fan base might already be viewed as having been disrespected because I said I think Pittsburgh might make it, but I think it's less controversial, of course, to say that Boston's still going to make it.
I mean, I think that fan base got disrespected when they parked a car in the arena, and it wasn't even a good one.
Fair enough. And that car had a better view than half of the fans in that building.
I mean, my dying shopping mall at least has a Tesla in it.
God, don't get me started on the old Tesla brand and one Elon Musk. We don't need to go down that road, but
at least on this
episode. What division are we going to talk about next? We have the West and we have the Central, which is weird because the Central has Eastern and Western Conference teams, but the West is just all Western Conference teams.
I think we should keep up the alphabetical order and go with the West.
Yeah, works for me. Okay, so 8 teams in this division, right? We have another really close call here. I got to be honest. There's one team that I think everyone's probably fairly confident in that won't be making the playoffs, that is the Los Angeles Kings.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, I guess we'll just talk about them really quickly, too. Like, I don't hate certain aspects of their team, but again, you look at the roster on Cap Friendly, and it's Iafallo Kopitar Brown, which is fine, but not nearly the best first line in the league. They signed Athanasiou, who, I mean, unless he has a crazy season, he's going to find himself in the KHL sooner rather than later. Blake Lizotte and a washed 36-year-old Jeff Carter.
Yeah, it's nuts. How has this team failed to rebuild at any point on so many levels? I don't even understand what happened to the Kings, because it's not like they ever overspent or I don't know. It's weird.
Drew Doughty's coming up.
Yeah. So I guess they they definitely gave. Well, yeah, you know what? I just brought them up on Cap Friendly.
Yeah. So, I mean, the rest of the team, it's Kempe, Velarde, Wagner is fine, younger players. I mean, Kempe and Wagner have been around for a bit, but they haven't done too well, in my opinion. And then like Trevor Moore, Mike Amadio, I think is a really good fourth liner who'd be good on pretty much any team. And Matt Luff's okay too. But the problem with this team right now is the defense. You have Ole Mata, who the Blackhawks gave up just to get rid of him, and Drew Doughty as your top pairing. Mikey Anderson and Matt Roy, and then Cale Clegg and Mark Alt, who I didn't even know was signed with an NHL team anymore. He used to be with the Flyers and then with the Avs, and he has made this team. So to that point, it's interesting as well. From the looks of it, though, it looks like he's in the lineup because Curtis McDermott and Sean Walker are out for undisclosed reasons. But, you know, when you have someone like that as kind of a depth option, it's scary. And then obviously like Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson between the pipes are solid. Like I remember when Jonathan Quick signed his contract, because it's worth $5.8 million, and people were like, "Oh my God, how can you sign a goalie to that much?" And now you have Bassey making like $10 million in Tampa. But the most interesting thing about this lineup, because I think everyone knows it's not that good, Elias Anderson, acquired from the Rangers, is a healthy scratch right now.
Oof, that's that. Yeah, you know what? I think a lot of people they liked Elias Anderson. The kid showed some emotion, but for whatever reason, he just never took that step.
Yeah, interesting enough too, Quentin Byfield is on the taxi squad.
You know what? I think a player like Quentin Byfield, who dominated in juniors, but had a lot of size on his side, I feel like it's fair to have him just dip his toe in the water instead of throwing him in the deep end.
Could be because
I think that makes sense.
Could be because of everything going on, like, you know, how COVID's affecting the OHL and everything too.
Yeah, that is true. Something I will say about the Kings, though, I think Ole Mata is a significantly better defenseman than most people think he is. I mean, don't get me wrong, he is kind of like in that weird area where he puts up numbers that would make you think he's offensively minded. I mean, he's definitely fragile. I think he's only ever played one full season. But I don't know. I like Ole Mata.
I don't think he's horrible like some people think. He might be slightly overpaid at this point. He actually nailed it, by the way, with Ole Mata only playing one full season, and that was in 17-18 with Pittsburgh. Although, I guess with Chicago, 65 games. I don't know if they played 65 or 70, but point remains. Yeah, I mean, I think he's decent. He's not who you want on your top pair defense, but he's decent.
Yeah.
All right.
So LA, garbage.
Well, here's the thing, too. The one thing I was going to note is they have the most cap space in the league. I do not understand how they don't go to Tampa and say, hey, we'll take Tyler Johnson might have a no movement clause or a no trade. I got to look that up. But regardless, go to Tampa and be like, oh, we'll take Tyler Johnson via trade or on waivers in exchange for a little bit of compensation. I don't know how they haven't done that yet.
Yeah, and it's also interesting they have the most cap space in the league because they have two guys on this team making $10 million or more.
Mm-hmm.
And then you work in California taxes. Like, does everybody else on this team just live together in one large house?
They might. Oh, man. That's fair, though. They have, because, Doughty's on 11, Kopitar's on 10, and then Dustin Brown and Jeff Carter combined make about another 11 mil. So there's a lot of money tied up in just a handful of players. It is their core players, but still, a lot of money tied up in the handful of players. Pretty much everyone else being younger and not making as much money. So the other three teams I have on the outside looking in, I'm confident about two of them, but one of them I think is a big a toss-up team this year that could make the jump. The two that I have out are the other two California teams. I don't think Anaheim and San Jose are going to make it. In terms of Anaheim, I mean, again, they have one of the better goalies in the league in John Gibson, and I do still like Ryan Miller as a backup, even though he's 40. But overall, looking at the Ducks, just the offense is pretty young, and I just don't think quite there yet. Again, Silfverberg, Henrique, Raquel as a top line, not one of the better ones in the league, even though they're good players. Then you have Ryan Getzlaf, who can still put up points, but defensively, like, man, for the criticisms that we talked about with Eric Stahl, where people say, oh, well, he's slowing down, like the wheels are falling off. Like, I think that better describes Ryan Getzlaf, unfortunately, even though I love the guy. I have a Getzlaf jersey, but he's just kind of fallen off a bit. Like their third line is Comtois, Steele, and Terry, who are 22, 22, and 23. So the offense I just don't think is there. Defensively as well, I mean, Lindholm, Shattenkirk is solid. Shattenkirk, good for him to bounce back after getting bought out by the Rangers and then going to Tampa and winning a cup. Fowler Manson's a good pairing. But then your third pairing right now is Jacob Larson, who is replacement level, and Yanni Hakanpää, who came back to the NHL last year and never really cracked the lineup. Like Brendan Gooley or Cody Curran might be the guys. But, I mean, Deej, I think you could tell off of the name value of what I just said there, it's not a good defensive situation for Anaheim.
It definitely isn't. I think if I'm an Anaheim fan, I look at a couple things. I say that this year is gonna suck first and foremost. But then you look forward, right? This is what interests me about Anaheim. I know we're doing a preview for this year, but what's interesting to me for Anaheim is after this year, they got David Backes, $4.5 million coming off the books. Ryan Getzlaf, 8.3 coming off the books. I believe here on Cap Friendly, they're paying 6.7 to Corey Perry this year. All of that's coming off the books, and you have a prospect on your team that just absolutely dominated at the World Juniors. He won player of the tournament over Spencer Knight. I think that's all you need to say about Trevor Zegras. And so suddenly you have an elite prospect and a ton of cap room. I don't think Anaheim is going to be in the toilet for much longer.
No. I mean, if we were to have the conversation, and we could do that on a later episode if we wanted to, the top prospect pools, in our opinion, Anaheim would be up there for sure. With Trevor Zegras and Jamie Drysdale as well on defense, two of the better players, I think, that we saw in the World Junior Tournament this year.
Oh, without a doubt. So let's go east to Arizona and talk about the other California team.
The San Jose Sharks missing out on the playoffs. That was beautiful.
Fish in the desert.
I love that they play in Arizona, and they actually start off their season on the 14th playing in their home building against the Coyotes. So it's tremendous. This team, I don't know what the answer is for the Sharks right now, because I think Doug Wilson is long overdue to be fired as the GM of this team. They missed their cup window, and now he's just kind of digging them into a further hole. The goaltending, Martin Jones, obviously not what they thought he would be. And then Devin Dubnyk, I'm sorry, he is not the guy. Like, you basically have Martin Jones replicated here. It's the same guy. Maybe they help take the pressure off of one another, but I don't see how that works. And then the continued theme of this Sharks team, it's like, oh, okay, name value, and then who the hell is that? Defensively, it's Vlasic, who's overpaid as hell. We all know that. And Erik Karlsson, which hopefully he's finally healthy. You have Mario Ferraro with Brent Burns, which is okay. And then your third pairing is replacement level options in Radim Simic and Jacob Middleton. So I'm scared of that, but obviously you don't have the money to do anything else about it. And then forward-wise, we did see them claim Rudolph Balcers today from Ottawa. I'm surprised they weren't a little bit more involved in the waiver wire, because if there was a team that was going to claim somebody like a Josh Hosang to just be like, screw it, let's give this kid a shot at this point, this is the team that needs those type of players, because at the end of the day, we see someone in the lineup that is kind of fitting that bill. Second line looks like it's going to be John Leonard, Tomas Hertl, and maybe Evander Kane, which, I mean, that whole situation.
Yeah, today I found out I'm more wealthy than Evander Kane, as did many people, I think. So now he's talking about possibly not playing. And when you look at this offense, right, you see, I mean, Thomas Hertl it seems like he's finally gotten over that knee injury. Like I've made this comparison a couple times. We haven't talked about Central Division yet, but Thomas Hertl and Vinny Trocheck are very similar to me in that they both had this elite speed and hands, and then they had those massive leg injuries. And I don't know. To me, it seemed Thomas Hertl had to learn how to play again, and it seems he's finally figured out how to be elite. But then you got Logan Couture, and then it just drops off.
Yeah, I mean, Timo Meier, Logan Couture, Kevin Labanc as a top line. Like, Meier and Couture are legit, although, again, Logan Couture, I can't let it go. Anytime I think of him now, I think about him essentially bold-faced lying about being assaulted for saying he'd vote for Trump during the NHL bubble.
I forgot about that.
I didn't, because it's just like, what the hell? Is he mentally okay, is my question. Was he just looking for attention on that day? I have no idea. Kevin Labanc, good for him to have gotten money, almost a $5 million contract, because he had that deal last year where he took a 1-year deal to bet on himself, and I don't think it worked, but the Sharks still paid him. And then the bottom six is interesting. Matt Nieto, solid player. Ryan Donato, they got from Minnesota for virtually nothing, so I think he'll do pretty well. Noah Gregor's solid, good speed on him. And then the fourth line, Patrick Marleau, who's back. Joel, I think it's Shellman because he's Swedish, so it's not Kelman. And then Marcus Sorensen. So, it's just kind of that typical San Jose offense, maybe a little bit better, where it's like you're going to be relying on some unproven guys to make it work. But yeah, just all in all, the biggest detriment, aside from maybe some depth issues on offense and defense, that goaltending just cannot be trusted until they prove otherwise.
Yeah, and I would just like to remind everybody, because I forgot as I'm looking at the roster here, Patrick Marleau played for the Penguins last year.
A childhood dream came true.
Apparently. So yeah, there's a huge hole here. You can't spend $30 million on 3 defensemen, especially when 2 of them aren't consistently. I mean, Brent Burns is going to be making $8 million a year until he's 40. I mean, Erik Karlsson. I mean, I don't know how you undug this.
Fair enough. The youngest of those 3 defensemen as well. Vlasic is 33. So,
yeah, 33.
So that brings us to the 5 teams left. Like I said, one of them is on the outside looking in. And that team that I have on the outside looking in, I don't feel overly confident about it, but I have the Minnesota Wild missing the playoffs. But I openly acknowledge that they could make it for a couple of reasons here. Now, I do like the top line, kind of. You have Zach Parise, still pretty good, even at 36. But right now, it's Nick Bjugstad, who is slotted in on the first line. You are very familiar with Nick Bjugstad as a Panthers fan, and very familiar with the injury concerns.
Nick Bjugstad, I have never in my entire life as a hockey fan seen a player milk one good season so successfully as Nick Bjugstad. He has convinced so many different clubs that he is a top liner. And don't get me wrong, he plays with so much heart, but he just can't finish. He gets breakaways constantly, and they go straight into the pads every single time. If you're a Minnesota fan and you're excited to see Nick Bjugstad, you're going to watch this play out several times over. And I really want to see Nick Bjugstad succeed. He is one of my favorite players to watch. I mean, I really got into hockey in earnest that first year where Florida had 3 first-round picks and used them on Eric Goodbranson, Nick Bjugstad, and Quentin Howden. What a great draft. And so Nick Bjugstad, I've rooted for year after year. He's got the size. He has the hockey IQ. He is unfortunately very injury prone, and he has trouble scoring. He is, in my opinion, the ideal second or third line depth scorer, but you can't expect him to carry your top line.
And it's interesting that they put him as the top line center with some of the other centers that they have on the team. But the last member of that top line right now, if you want to Americanize it, apparently it's Kaprizov, but we have Kirill Kaprizov. And he is the X factor to me right now. Now, when I took a look at these lineups, I kind of slotted in players Looking at the lineup, like I'd factor in Kaprizov as like replacement level, but openly acknowledge that that's only because we haven't seen him play, in the NHL yet. But obviously, you look at the guy, you know what he's done in the KHL. People are hoping he is going to translate like Artemi Panarin, and if he does, that really boosts up a decent group of forwards here. Now, the second line, Marcus Johansen, again, I don't think is better than Eric Stahl, so I view that as a step back. But they did get Nick Bonino from Nashville for pennies on the dollar in a trade involving Luke Cunnin, which I think they absolutely fleeced Nashville in that deal, especially with the contract the Preds gave Cunnin. But then Kevin Fiala's there as well, who stepped up big time last year. So I'm really intrigued to see what the two former Nashville players in Bonino and Fiala can do. And then that third line, I think, is great. And it's relatively young, too. You have Jordan Greenway and Joel Eriksson Ek, who are both 23, and a Marcus Foligno, who, while we were recording this, signed an extension with Minnesota, and I really like what he can do as a top-notch third-line guy. Fourth line's a little bit weak with Nico Sturm and Victor Rask, but Ryan Hartman plays that really heavy style. So I don't hate what they have going on with the forwards there. The reason why, though, I have Minnesota on the outside looking in, and I should note as well, of course, that Matt Zuccarello is currently listed as out. He'll obviously help that forward core a little bit more. I imagine it would be Nico Sturm who takes a seat. But I just don't know if a decent forward core and a decent defense core, which we'll get into, actually we might as well now, top pairing of Ryan Suter, Matt Dumba, pretty damn good still. Dumba, obviously they're going to want him to step it up a little bit. Arguably the best defense pairing in the league, Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon. And then Carson Suchi and Greg Pateryn are fine third pairing guys. But the goaltending is the reason for me why I just can't put them in the playoffs over the other team that I'm going to talk about next. But it's Cam Talbot, and right now an injured Alex Stalock, according to Cap Friendly, so Kaapo Kakkonen is there as well. I like what Cam Talbot's been able to do. He's an improvement on Devin Dubnyk, but if you tell me, hey, place your bets that Cam Talbot's going to be the guy to get Minnesota back into the playoffs, I just don't know if I can do that.
I mean, Cam Talbot, pride of Huntsville, Alabama, he put up some good numbers with the Flames last year. And so for me, I think seeing that defense core, I am excited to see a very serviceable, reasonable, talented defense core in front of Cam Talbot, who, in my opinion, has very unfortunately had to wait until age 33 for there to be a decent, respectable defense in front of him. And so hopefully he takes that step, takes it to his advantage, and puts up some decent numbers.
Now, admittedly, too, they have a new head coach. Granted, he was the interim head coach as of last February, Dean Evason, I do believe. But I can't really speak to his coaching style, his philosophies, and if that more defensive first style that we saw, whether it be an Islanders team or a Dallas Stars team who rode it all the way to the final. I don't know if they'll be able to adapt that, but I openly acknowledge Minnesota could make the playoffs. I've backed them in the past in like these preseason predictions, but I think this year more than any, I have a chance to be proven wrong.
I will say that Minnesota is attempting something that was done in Florida, which is Nick Bjugstad, when he played for the Golden Gophers. His line mate, Kyle Rao, and him put up insane numbers in the NCAA. So, of course, the Florida Panthers got both of them, and I'm glad to see that Minnesota is doing the same thing with Kyle Rao on their AHL team.
Fair enough. So, the other team that I was alluding towards that I do have making the playoffs over Minnesota, because I feel like the top three are obvious, but the other team I have making the playoffs over Minnesota is the Arizona Coyotes. Your thoughts?
So the Arizona Coyotes, you know what? I don't even know what to make of the Coyotes right now, especially considering they're allowing fans. Phil Kessel's going to regress. You lose Taylor Hall. Like you got some good players. I think we saw the Coyotes able to outplay, like the what's the word I'm looking for? The sum, or the whole of the Coyotes was greater than the sum of its parts. Yeah. There we go. That's what they say. And And you look at the roster, and nobody really pops out.
So
And
the thing,
and they somehow outplay.
So the thing for me, I acknowledge I think I like Minnesota's offense, a little bit more. Their defense, maybe a tiny bit more, but it's just the goaltending factor. If you're asking me to trust Cam Talbot, Alex Stalock, or Kaapo Kähkönen over Darcy Kemper or Antti Ranta if they're healthy, I just can't do it. And like I said, I think the defense, they're pretty close. Minnesota, I would say, has the best defenseman on either team in Jared Spurgeon, but on the Coyotes right now, it's shaping up to be Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Jason Demers, which is solid. Jacob Chychrun, who I think is fantastic, with Alex Goligoski and Jordan Oesterle.
South Florida native. South Florida native, Jacob Chychrun.
Jordan Oesterle with Nick Hjalmarsson, who isn't what he used to be, but still a serviceable player. So that's the main reason for me, because I openly acknowledge with this forward group, I mean, right now, you're looking at a top line of Lawson Krause, Nick Schmaltz, and Connor Garland. Krause was a bit better last year. He's 23, so he still has time. Nick Schmaltz is good, but not who you want as a first-line center. And then Connor Garland has really been making an impact over the past 2 seasons. But that's their top line right now. And the second line isn't much better. You signed Drake Caggiula, which I like. He's fast. But ideal second liner, no. Christian Dvorak, though, again, the center on the line, very underrated two-way player. And then you have Phil Kessel, where, we mentioned it earlier, did Taylor Hall, the addition of that, kind of affect Phil Kessel's game at all? Third line's okay. Clayton Keller, probably not where Coyotes fans thought he'd be 2-3 years ago. Derek Brassard, who they signed, who I view more as a fourth line option. Tyler Pitlick's okay. They did end up getting Johan Larsson from Buffalo, which I think that was a huge mistake that Buffalo let go of him and brought back Zemgus Girgensons, and that was before the injury to Girgensons is going to keep him out for the year. But Christian Fish and Barrett Hayton, I might be putting a little bit too much stock into the goaltending on this one. I can openly admit that, because as I look at these forward lines, I'm like, okay, good players, but who's going to step up and be great? I don't know who's going to do that. But it's very, very close.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I have such a hard time making out what's going on with the Coyotes, but it worked for them last year, and hopefully it works for them again this year. Wow. Also, I will say, Coyotes fans, prepare to watch Dryden Hunt not score a lot. I've never seen a more snake-bitten player in my life. And I don't know if I just said that about Nick Bjugstad, but I will say Dryden Hunt is the most snake-bitten player I have ever seen.
He is on their taxi squad. Maybe he puts it together. So,
all right. So let's talk about the teams that actually make it.
Yeah, and make it quite easily. Top of the group, perhaps controversial as well, because there's a heavy favorite out of the West division here. But I have the Vegas Golden Knights as my top team in the West.
Interesting. So I think when you're saying heavy favorite, everybody's betting on Colorado. Yeah, I mean, up and down, Vegas is Colorado is a little top heavy compared to Vegas.
I think it's Colorado's offense against Vegas's defense. So then for me, it comes down to the goaltending, which obviously I'm going to air with Vegas, with Robin Lehner and Marc-Andre Fleury. I mean, say what you want about, how the Fleury situation's gone down over the past year or so, but you look at that tandem, and it's no disrespect to Philip Grubauer and Pavel Francois. I've heard 17 different pronunciations for it. But, I mean, obviously, there's a goaltending tandem that you pick over one over the other, and you go with Vegas over Colorado.
Yeah, you know what? I gotta agree with you when it comes down to the goaltending. I will say Riley Smith historically has a pattern of having an amazing year and then a terrible year, and then an amazing year and then a terrible year, and he had a pretty damn good year last year. So he may be taking a step back.
Fair. I mean, it's tough, though, because like I said, you look at this offense and you still see good pieces. I mean, Marchessault, Carlson, Smith is projected to be their top line, which, again, thank you, Florida, even all these years later. Second line, I like a lot. Max Pacioretty, Chandler Stevenson, who stepped up a lot since he was acquired from Washington, and Mark Stone, who, I mean, obviously, how he doesn't have a Selke trophy to his name already, I don't know. I like the third
They only
line.
give him the centers.
That's true. Only he was the center. I like the third line a lot with Nick Waugh, Cody Glass, and Alex Tuck, who is currently showing up as injured, but day-to-day apparently. And then the fourth line, William Carrier is a honey badger on ice. Thomas Nosek is fine. And then you have Ryan Reeves. And you could talk about the effect of Ryan Reeves, whether or not he has a positive or negative effect on the team. There are some people who are dead set, no, having a guy like Reeves out there creates space for other teammates. Or you're on the opposite effect of Ryan Reeves is sitting on the bench for the majority of the game. And how can he have that effect when he's on the bench? And so on and so forth. So I still like the top 6 that they have quite a bit, top 9 really. And then defensively, obviously, Alex Pietrangelo, the gigantic addition. He's going to be on the top pair with Braden McNabb, which I like a lot. You have Alec Martinez with Shea Theodore, and Shea Theodore is legit. I mean, if anyone thinks like, oh, Vegas finally has a number 1 defenseman now that Pietrangelo's there, like, no, Shea Theodore is already that number 1 defenseman. They have 2 guys who are absolutely fantastic. And then the third pairing, you have Nick Holden, who Bruins and Rangers fans are going to be like, he sucks. But if you look at some of the numbers, he's actually not that bad. He's especially good for a third pairing defenseman. He's slotted in with Zach Whitecloud right now, who, again, not too bad. So it's tough to find a weakness with this Golden Knights team.
Yeah, you know what? I agree. I think the only reason people are rooting against them is because they suck.
A lot of trash talk in the appearance of entitlement.
Yeah, but I mean, they really robbed Dale Talon and turned it into something special.
They sure did. So Colorado, then I guess we'll get them out of the way before getting to St. Louis. Again, I don't mind their goaltending. I just don't think it's as good as Vegas is on paper. But obviously, this offense, Burakovsky, McKinnon, Rantanen is incredible. Landeskog, Kadri, incredible in and of itself. And then you add Brandon Saad, which is still incredibly strange to think that Brandon Saad is a member of the Colorado Avalanche.
Yeah, that's weird.
Third line, Valeri Nichushkin, who has emerged as an incredible defensive player. It's always interesting, too, to look at the guys that are drafted in the first round and you think skill. But Valeri Nichushkin, he came back over from the KHL, and he is a fantastic defensive winger next to JT Compher and Jonas Donskoy, who the Sharks never should have let go of. And then Tyson Jost.
Or the Panthers.
That's right. He was on the Panthers, too.
Yeah, he was a prospect that we just didn't sign.
Oh, my God.
May I say Dale didn't sign.
99th overall in the 4th round of the 2010 draft by the Florida Panthers. Oh, my God. Whew. And anyway, 4th line, Tyson Jost, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, and Matt Calvert. So obviously it's very solid. I have their offense is better than Vegas's. Defensively, though, is where we have some question marks, and I didn't think I would say that. They add Devon Taves from the Islanders for 2 second-round picks or whatever, which is a steal. He's next to Cale Makar, who is obviously incredible. You have Samuel Girard there as well, who I really like. But then you get into a couple of question marks. You have Connor Timmins, who he's only 22, but it looked like his career was done. Some major injury troubles, worked his way back last year, now cracks this opening night lineup from the looks of it. So I'm intrigued to see what he can do, but big question mark. And then Ryan Graves, who Rangers fans look at as like, well, why couldn't he have been this good when he was here? He's on a new contract now. I'm intrigued to see if he can keep that up. And he's next to Ian Cole, who has had some injury concerns, but is still solid when he plays. So really, for me, Colorado's defense just comes down to a couple of question marks that I don't have about Vegas's. And then, of course, I have the goaltending for Vegas as well. So Colorado, I don't doubt, could win this division, could win the Stanley Cup this year. But they do have a couple of things to prove. Eric Johnson right now, a factor as well. Currently out with an undisclosed injury, so I don't know where he'd slot in on defense. But again, it's
Eric
close.
Johnson, man, that guy has seen some shit. He's been on this team for a really long time, just waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like forever ago. I don't even remember the details of the trade of how he came over from the Blues, because he was the first overall pick in 2006, which is insane to think of how long he's been around. The trade, actually, I just looked it up. It was traded from St. Louis with Jay McClement and a first-round pick in the 2011 draft that became Duncan Simons, whose name is spelled, I think, Siemens. People would probably know him. For Chris Stewart, Kevin Shattenkirk, and a second-round pick that became Ty Ratty. So not the most memorable trade in the world, and I think the only player that's left with his team is Erik Johnson.
Yeah, that's nuts. So yeah, it's about time it's about time Erik Johnson sees the fruits of his labor.
Indeed. So then, last team in the Western Division, obviously, is St. Louis. And again, I acknowledge that they could win this division as well. Vegas, Colorado, and St. Louis in this division makes it so incredibly tough for everybody else, because it's almost impossible to not imagine those three teams making the playoffs. You do have, the concern of Tarasenko coming off of a pretty major injury. But right now, the lineup as it stands on Cap Friendly is Braden Shen, Ryan O'Reilly, and David Perron, which is incredible. Jaden Schwartz, Robert Thomas, and now Mike Hoffman, which I'm intrigued to know your opinion on Mike Hoffman going to the Blues.
Yeah, I think it's odd. So to me, obviously the Panthers are in a cap situation where even though Mike Hoffman said he wanted to play here, we can't sign him for more than a year. And I don't think there's any reason to give a player like Mike Hoffman a 1 year when you can't resign him the next year. So you might as well go cup chase
At the start,
Panthers team.
At the start of this, of course, because obviously now he signed that 1 year deal, $4 million with the Blues. But I think what you're talking about is like at the start of this, when you would have actually been negotiating with him, that wasn't his expectation for the contract he was going to get.
Oh, no, definitely not. There were rumors that the Panthers offered him 3 years, $5 million per. But I don't know. I would have really loved to have signed Mike Hoffman, but I think it's way better for him to just take a 1 year somewhere, show that. I mean, this is a team that I think is going to be without Vladimir Tarasenko this season. They're talking about reevaluating him at the end of February. And the guy's had 3 surgeries in the last year. I think he's going to be able to step in to where Tarasenko would be playing and put up some huge numbers and get paid next year.
Could be. The rest of the forward line, Zach Sanford, Tyler Bozak, Sammy Blais, which is fine. And then Kyle Clifford, Ivan Barbashev, and Oscar Sundqvist, which again is fine. They certainly play that more defensive, physical style role. The big changes, of course, have come on the defensive side of things. The new top pair, Torrey Krug and Colton Parayko. 5'9" Torrey Krug next to 6'6" Colton Parayko. I wish I could say I'm looking forward to seeing what that pairing can do, but obviously it kind of pains me to look at. Second pair, Marco Scandella and Justin Falk. So like we talked about a lot, Scandella, sit back, let Justin Falk go to work, and hope that contract doesn't look so bad now that Petrangelo's gone. And then Vince Dunn, Robert Portuzzo is kind of the same setup. So I do like their defense a lot. But the big reason why I have them below Vegas and Colorado is the goaltending. Jordan Binnington, it's tough to say you don't trust somebody who has a Stanley Cup to his name, but goes from a 927 the year that they won the Cup to a 912 last year, which is still okay. But now their backup goaltender isn't Jake Allen. It is Ville Husso, who does not have an NHL game to his credits, and his past 2 seasons in the AHL, actually the past 3 to play it fair. So 17-18 in San Antonio, he plays 38 games and has a 922 save percentage. Oh my God, he looks great. The next year, in 18-19, plays 27 games and has an 871. And then this past season, he plays 42 games and has a 909. I am sorry, Blues fans, but I cannot sit here and say I'm banking on Ville Husso to be a strong backup to Jordan Binnington. I just can't do it.
I think, honestly, I think we see John Gillies at some point. I think John Gillies is starting to get to a point where, despite the inconsistency, I think he's ready. He's at that age where he's going to make a step forward. Plus, how can you not love John Gillies? He's huge.
He is, and he's also the pride of South Portland, Maine. To note, though, I think Joel Hofer, he's made their taxi squad as their goalie. He's 20 years old. He's coming off of a solid season in the WHL with the Portland Winterhawks. But, yeah, I mean, the goaltending situation for St. Louis right now, it's Jordan Binnington, who some people have questions about. I think he'll be fine, if not good to great. But that backup goaltending situation with this kind of condensed schedule, it would freak me out a little bit because those are valuable points that I think you're going to miss out on that Vegas and Colorado won't.
Yeah, you're going to have goalies that just have a few bad games. That's going to cost you because this division is competitive as hell.
Absolutely. So that brings us to our final division, does it not? If we're going alphabetically, of course.
I think real quick before we move on, I just want to look at some of the non-roster forwards here on St. Louis. So shout out to Nathan Walker, Pride of Australia. But early name shout out goes to Sam Anas.
I think that's ANAS, right?
Yeah, as well as Alexei. It's not Topo Chico, but it might as well be. Toropchenko. That is a fantastic name. They've got a pretty serious Hugh McGing. Like this is a solid selection of hockey names here.
So for our future podcast here, then, so we have the best prospect pool, and then we also have the best names in the system episode to do.
Just the equipment manager that gets to quietly laugh to himself the most.
Right. So, correct me if I'm wrong. Last but not least is the Central Division.
The Discover card, and I put this in air quotes, Central Division.
Right, because my God, geographically, is this a little bit of a mess? So
that it is.
8 teams in this division. Obviously, only 4 can make the playoffs. Do we start with those who will make the playoffs, or do we continue the trend of going with those who won't?
Well, so I'll say the first thing that I think is interesting about this division is I think of all the divisions, this is the only one where all 8 teams, you could make an argument for them making the top 4. I will say there are 4 of them that are significantly more likely than the others, but there's certainly, I mean, aside from Detroit, but they've taken some step forwards. There really isn't any team that is openly rebuilding.
So there are 2 teams for me, and we'll talk about them first because they're my bottom 2 teams, but there are 2 teams for me that I just don't see there being a case for making the playoffs. And then the other 6, you're right, it's going to be a bit of a slugfest. That first team is Detroit. Again, like you said, they have made some decent moves that I actually really like. That top line of Bertuzzi, Larkin, Mantha is fantastic. But from there, that forward depth just plummets. They have Vladislav Nemesnikov, Robbie Fabry, and Philip Zadina. The first 2 are fine. Zadina looks like he is going to live up to his potential. The third line, Matthias Brome, perhaps, who we have no idea what he's going to be coming over from Sweden. He is the definition of guy, next to Valtteri Filppula, who's okay, and Sam Gagner, who I don't know if he's NHL caliber anymore. And then your fourth line of Adam Ernie, who's Franz Nielsen, who is 36 and not what he used to be, still making $5 million though, and Luke Glendening. That forward core is, I think it has to be the worst in the league, if not incredibly close.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby Ryan on this team is fascinating to me. But, you know, even though Sam Gagner, I feel like he should be 100 years old. He's only 31. And when you say Sam Gagner, I think the night he tied Gretzky's record and had an 8-point game. And I mean, one game doesn't make a career, but I don't know. I think for some reason I always think of Sam Gagner as slightly better than he actually is because of that game.
That's a fair point, too, about Bobby Ryan. He wasn't listed in the injury tab, so I wasn't sure if he was down on the taxi squad or not now that Detroit's confirmed their roster. So defensively, though, I don't know how much better it is. Danny DeKeyser, who's okay when he's not hurt, but he's still making $5 million. Philip Ronick, who is pretty good. But then your second pairing is Mark Stahl, who is not a regular NHLer anymore, who obviously it was a smart move to take him, get assets from Detroit for that deal. He's with Troy Stecher, who's good. And then Patrick Nemeth, who I think is one of the most underrated defensemen in the league, is with John Merrill. So it's just not there. And then obviously the goaltending's good, though. You bring in Thomas Greiss from the Islanders, and you still have Jonathan Bernier, who quietly, or maybe not so quietly, especially last year where Jimmy Howard just could not win a game, and Jonathan Bernier was managing to win games behind this historically bad Red Wings team. I like some of the options they have there, but like I said, you look at this team, and sure, Darren Helm, Bobby Ryan might still be involved in the offense. They picked up Christian Juice from Anaheim off waivers, but I don't see, unless the other team I have in my bottom two in this division just commits to the tank, I don't really see how Detroit isn't the bottom team in the Central.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? Now that you mention it, I definitely thought they put in a lot more pieces than they actually did, and I think I can soundly take back what I said earlier. Where this team, I don't think you can make an argument for them making the playoffs. And looking at their cap friendly, I find it absolutely fascinating that Detroit is still paying Stephen Weiss this year.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Jeez, when's the last time he played for them? That's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Oh, so he was the lone bright spot on the Panthers for 20 years. So he, for 2014-15, was his last time he played for Detroit.
And of course, they just bought out Justin Abdelkader too. So they're, hey, Yzerman's doing what he has to do. And again, for Detroit, they're another one of those teams, right? Where it's okay, this upcoming draft, they already have 3 second-round picks. 2/3 still have all their original picks as well. So it's not as if they're not set up for the future, and it's not as if there shouldn't be faith in Steve Yzerman to get them back to their prior glory. But it's not happening anytime soon.
Yeah.
So the other team then that I have is Chicago, that will not be making the playoffs. Your thoughts?
Let's see. The thing with Chicago is I think they are reaping what they sowed. They're one of those teams where they sacrificed, their future for years of success, and that it's come to call. And I mean, they got 2 cups out of it?
3. Well, 2010, 2013, 2015. Although you could argue that 2010 was kind of the catalyst for the next 2, where they said, oh, we got to run here. This isn't just a one-off. So I get what you're saying there.
But yeah, they, the devil comes a-calling sometime. They've got some guys on the team. Alex DeBrincat, he's a stud. Patrick Kane's gonna Patrick Kane. But then, it looks like a lot of project players that just didn't work out.
Yeah, so the big thing for them, right now, Carl Soderberg was signed, who I do really like. I think that's a decent loss for Arizona. He's under COVID quarantine right now. You have Alex Nylander, who has been out since, I believe, December. I don't think he's good to go. Kirby Dach, of course, picked up that injury just before the World Juniors started. It happened in one of the exhibition games. He's going to be out for basically the entire season. And Jonathan Toews is out right now as well, which is a huge hit because he looked like the Jonathan Toews of old in the playoffs. So right now, you factor in those players not being on the depth chart, but right now they have top line DeBrincat, Strome, Kane, which I like. Kubalik, who was fantastic, but he's next to former Florida Panther Lucas Wallmark, and I think former Florida. Jesus, there we go. Former Florida Panther and Brandon Peary as well.
Yeah, Brandon Peary, there is a player that cannot pass the puck to save his life. Let me see the exact stat line. Yeah, so his famous year with the Florida Panthers, he had 22 goals and 2 assists. Mm-hmm. Obviously he's gotten a little bit better, but he's a guy with a great shot, but not exactly what you would call playmaking ability. Wallmark, he was basically invisible on the Panthers, unfortunately. I really wanted him to work out. We gave him a shot, and he just hopefully in Chicago he can get something going, because he's certainly a talented player. He just never got anything going here.
And on the third line, we see Janmark, who came over from Dallas, who's solid defensively. Pius Suter coming over from Switzerland, I'm quite sure. And then Andrew Shaw is back, and a fourth line of Matt Highmore, David Kampf, and Ryan Carpenter. So obviously, I think everybody can point it out. The injuries to Taves, Doc, Nylander just cripple that forward line. And defensively, it's not that bad, but it's not good enough to make up for it. You have Duncan Keith and Connor Murphy. Duncan Keith's on the way down. Connor Murphy, better than people give him credit for, but not probably who you want on your top defense pair. You have Calvin DeHaan on the second pairing as well. Again, someone when he's healthy, he's great, but he hasn't been healthy for a long time. He's with Ian Mitchell, who's cracked this lineup at 21 years old. And then Nikita Zadorov, who they picked up from Colorado, is with Adam Boqvist, who is a tremendous offensive defenseman at 20 years old. So you can see there, that defense not really in playoff form. And then the goaltending is where we get to the massive issue, because Corey Crawford, of course, is gone. He was going to New Jersey. He retires. And instead, we see Malcolm Subban and Colin Delia. This is the worst tandem in the league on paper. It's not even close.
Yeah, I got to agree with you. We look at Delia, and Delia is completely unproven at the NHL level. He might have something going, but I certainly haven't seen enough to tell you anything about Delia.
He's played 18,
of what he could possibly do.
He's played 18 games, 2 games in 17-18. He had an 889, and then in 18-19, he had 16 games with a decent 908, but then obviously was right back into the AHL this past season. And even once they traded Robin Lehner, he wasn't the guy to get the call up. So what does that say?
I think Malcolm Subban is the interesting story here. I mean, obviously Malcolm Subban throughout his career has had issues with consistency, but he's certainly a player that has shown flashes. And then I guess consistency is going to be the issue there.
Yeah, and they do have Kevin Lankinen on their taxi squad as well. A lot of Hawks fans calling for him to get a shot, which I understand. You are looking at somebody in the AHL last year, a 909 and 910 the year before, but had a lot of hype coming over from Finland. 16-17 season over in Liga, he had a 920, and then 17-18, his final year over in Finland. He only played 15 games in the regular season, but he had a 946 save percentage and a 936 and 13 playoff games. So a lot of Hawks fans at this stage still banking on Kevin Lankinen to kind of be their guy between the pipes, because otherwise you kind of swung and missed with Alexis Gravel, who they took, I think, in the third round a couple of years ago. They just let his rights go. They didn't sign him. So the problem with Crawford being gone, the Hawks fans are desperate for one of these guys to be the answer, because otherwise, what is the answer other than maybe, cashing in free agency? But it's not something you want to bank on.
Yeah, and especially with the goalie market the way it is, we're just, will the Blackhawks even be able to afford signing a starter at this point?
That's another factor for sure, too. So then we get to the 6 teams that are in the running for the playoffs. I will tell you the 4 that I have making it. It is, of course, between Tampa, Carolina, Nashville, Dallas, Florida, and Columbus. And I read it in order. I think it's Florida and Columbus that just miss out.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the reasons, we'll get to Florida last, but I think one of the reasons Florida misses is they just added and subtracted way too many pieces, and it takes time for all that to mesh.
I agree. Screw it. We might as well talk about them now, then we'll talk about Columbus. It's fine. I agree. They are one of the more interesting teams of the free agency period, especially with what they did defensively, because you look at the addition of Marcus Nudivara for dirt cheap. I don't know if you know what's going on with him, but Cap Friendly has him listed as injured right now. But that defense is still solid. I don't think people realize how good Mackenzie Weegar and Aaron Ekblad are, and that's a fantastic top pairing. Riley Stillman is with Anton Strawman on the second pairing. Strawman's not what he used to be, but he's still solid, and Riley Stillman looked really good last year from what I saw. And then you have
and
Keith
he's only
Yandel.
22.
Right. And then you have Keith Yandel, who isn't what he used to be, in my opinion, but he's still decent with Radko Gudas.
So basically, the big thing that's going on, the drama in Panthers camp, is apparently Yandel has been relegated to the taxi squad. So we'll see if he ends up getting a start. There were rumors all over Twitter today that Yandel, they were telling him if he did not waive his no move clause, they would end his Iron Man streak.
Jesus.
So I've seen conflicting reports from very what would you call them, reputable sources. But we've got George Richards saying one thing, Nick Alberga saying another. So it's hard to say what's going on. But then you got to look into. We also just claimed Johansen off waivers.
Yes. Now, if I'm not mistaken, though, you have Johansen as an option. You also have Brady Keeper, former UMaine Black Bear, and Chase Prisky on the taxi squad. I like the looks of Prisky, but I think the key here, and it's an obvious fix, but all three of those defensemen I just named, right-handed shots, noted for playing the right side, whereas Yandel's a lefty.
Yeah, that's very true. So, it's also interesting where Weegar is one of the few players in the NHL where he's a right-handed shot that plays the left-handed side. Right. And, you've got Riley Stillman and then, Keith Yandel. But I guess we could also say Forsling, theoretically, is a left shot. So it's weird. I guess it's going to depend on how Q likes to set people up. I have not seen him shy away from putting two of the same shot together. Which, although unusual, it seems to be a situation the Panthers are in because of just the excessive amount of right-handed shots on this team.
It's a good problem to have, though. I mean, we can both admit that. Also, I mean, a good problem to have in a way, the goaltending situation in Florida. Bobrovsky right now should be good to go for the start of the season, maybe. Undisclosed injury according to Cap Friendly. But Chris Driedger setting up as the backup. Granted, 26 years old, finally cracks the NHL for a decent amount of time last year and looked amazing. Maybe not the guy you want to bank on to help be able to make the playoffs if there is an issue with Bob. Sam Montembeault as well. I know you could rant on about in terms of his development and how that's gone, even though he's still 24. The obvious thing with Florida is you look in their system and it's like, hey, well, eventually Spencer Knight or maybe even Devin Levi, the Canadians goaltender at the World Juniors here. But all in all, I mean, I think a big part of the chances at success hinges upon Bobrovsky. And I just can't bank on him right now if he's heading into the season injured, especially after somewhat of a down year last year. At least the first half of last season was rough, and then he started to turn it on.
Bobrovsky better figure out what's going on. And it's so interesting. Like if you're on Reddit comments, they're like, "Oh, he got paid and he stopped playing." But basically, anytime they interview the Florida Panthers, they tell you the very first guy in the gym every morning is Sergei Bobrovsky. The last guy to leave is Sergei Bobrovsky. So it's certainly not a matter of work ethic. I mean, he's a 2-time Vezina winner. Like he has the pedigree. It's just it's absolutely flabbergasting to me to see a guy go in, get paid, still continue to work that hard, not see the results. But then conversely, on the other side of the door, you have Chris Driedger, who in 12 games put up a .938 on a team that made Bobrovsky look like an AHL goalie. So I think we might see them more in a tandem situation this year, especially if Bobrovsky's gonna continue to lag a step behind. And I think Montembeault's in a situation where he definitely needs another season in the A. He did not look good with the Panthers last year. He put up an .890 in 14 games, and that's the same team that had Bobrovsky and Driedger playing on it with significantly better numbers. So he's going to need some more seasoning. He's been in the system for a long time. So we'll see what happens with Montembeault, but I certainly don't think he's the answer, especially with Knight and Devin Levi in the system. I mean, Knight, obviously the great white whale. I don't think Levi ever plays a game in the Panthers uniform.
It's fair enough. That's a fair assessment. Kind of a similar goaltending situation, I guess, to like Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson in Los Angeles, where it's like, okay, your starter looks rough behind the same defense, but your backup, who's mostly an AHLer, looks great. So figure that one out. Forward-wise, you have Carter Verhaeghe, Alex Barkov, Sasha Barkov, and Anthony Duclair on the top line. So 2 new additions next to Sasha Barkov. Verhaeghe, great AHLer, still unproven at the NHL level. I mean, he's bounced around a lot, though, from Toronto to the Islanders to the Lightning and now with Florida. And Duclair, of course, has bounced around a lot as well. Of course, with this being your favorite team, the team you support here, I want to know your thoughts first and foremost on this top line before we get to the rest of the forwards.
So there was a Reddit post about Verhaeghe getting put on the top line that I found fascinating. Basically, somebody went to the Lightning and they said, hey, what can we expect in Verhaeghe? And they said for him to absolutely kill it and then go to Seattle. So I think we're looking at a March Desault 2.0 situation. And you know what? I love the idea of Duclair on this top line. If the Panthers had one problem on their top line last year, it was they just kept passing. Like nobody took a shot. So they had issues finishing, especially off the power play. I mean, if you look at Hoffman, almost all of his goals were on the power play last year. So having a guy that'll shoot like Duclair.
Would you say, and not to interrupt that point, but it kind of goes along with your point, would you say that's a big part of the reason as to why we saw Sasha Barkov's defensive metrics slip a little bit, at least in some regards, was because they didn't have a scorer, so he was trying to be the everything offensively, which is a little bit out of the role that he succeeded in, which honestly made him one of the best players in the league.
So there was something going on with Barkov last year, and anybody who watched a number of Panthers games could tell you, like his hands weren't there. Like he was still making some good assists, but really Huberdeau was the line driver. And especially, I think the thing that is the most telling that there was something going on with Barkov last year was he, I believe, scored 1 shootout goal the whole year. And he's primarily known as the wizard when it comes to shootouts. He's the guy. He's the guy whose highlight reels you bring up. And he just could not score. He couldn't buy a goal. And so, I don't know. There was something going on with Barkov. I don't necessarily think he was injured, but he wasn't Barkov last year.
Fair enough. So second line, we do have the previously aforementioned Jonathan Huberdeau with new additions in Alex Wennberg and Patrick Hornqvist. Now, you have Wennberg coming off of being bought out by the Blue Jackets, so a lot to prove with him. Hornqvist is 34, coming over from the Penguins, but you kind of know what you're going to get with him in terms of that strong net front presence and being able to bang home, some of the secondary opportunities in front. It's an intriguing line, though.
Yeah, I'm more excited to see this line play than anything. If we hit on one of those guys between Hornqvist or Wennberg, suddenly, like our new GM, Bill Zito looks like a genius. And it's really not hard to look like a genius walking into Dale Talon's office. But, I'd love to see Wennberg turn it around. He had so much promise before he got those series of head injuries. He had issues with concussions. He is primarily a pass-first player. And so I really like the idea of adding him to like a gritty net front presence guy that's going to be able to score you those garbage goals if you get him the puck in the right area. And so I think those two will be a great combination combined with Jonathan Huberdeau, who's an elite line driver.
So third line, we have Frankie Vatrano, and at the moment, Eetu Luotz-Terainen and Owen Tippett has made this roster as well. Interesting there, though, with Vatrano, someone who obviously came over from the Bruins now a couple of years ago, still a solid option, but then 2 young, unproven players at the NHL level in Luotz-Terainen and Tippett.
Yeah, and for Tippett, this was just a matter of time for him to crack an NHL roster. He has the size, he has the skill, all the tools. The only thing he hasn't had is NHL ice time to prove it. He definitely would have been on the roster last year if not for a wrist injury that held him out. We certainly could have used him. So I'm very excited to see this new seasoned Owen Tippett on the team. And I think with Luotz-Terainen, I think it's really interesting to see him take Brett Connolly's spot more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing that caught my eye here, too, is that fourth line, Vinny Hinostroza, Noel Acciari, and Brett Connolly, which, again, Connolly is one of those guys, former first-round guy who, still is a solid option here. Obviously, we saw what he could do in the playoffs with Washington on their cup run. Noel Acciari was fantastic last year, and Vinny Hinostroza was a really good pickup. So, at times, this forward core looked questionable. I was noted in saying that as well. It's like, okay, like you have Verhaeghe, but then, some of the other moves, Duclair, Hornqvist, and now you look at like Hinostroza here on the fourth line. It's certainly a more complete picture, but obviously some question marks in regards to their ability to make the playoffs.
Certainly. And in an ideal world, the third and fourth lines on this team are very interesting in that they're not really specialized. They're kind of almost like secondary second lines in a weird way. Especially with the way Acciari took a step forward and showed that he can be a goal scorer. So I don't know. This forward core is fascinating to me, and there's too many new pieces for me to make an overall judgment call. But I think it's going to take some time to gel, and I think that's what might keep them out of the playoffs.
Yeah. So again, they're one of those teams kind of in the mix, along with the next two teams that we'll talk about, that I could easily see making the playoffs. But I did hedge my bets with one team over the other. The other team that I have on the outside looking in, again, maybe controversial, but it's the Columbus Blue Jackets. And honestly, it's for a couple of different reasons. Looking at the forward core first, you have Mikhail Grigorenko coming back over to the NHL. Of course, things didn't really work out with, I believe, Colorado and Buffalo when he was here the first time. We'll see how he's developed as a player, now 26 years old. You have Pierre-Luc Dubois, who is a stud, but we do not know if he's going to stay on this roster even by the end of this month. And then Oliver Bjorkstrand, who is a fantastic player, awarded with a brand new contract here, but question marks for different reasons on that top line. Second line is solid. Nick Foligno, the new acquisition of Max Domi and Cam Atkinson. A third line of Boone Jenner with, shockingly, Mikko Koivu. Still weird to think that he's not on Minnesota. And Riley Nash, who's, again, solid. And then a fourth line, which right now is just a youth line. Now, Brandon Dubinsky is probably done. Gustav Nyquist, I think, might be done for the season. Last I knew, it was a shoulder injury that was going to keep him out for 6 months. That was as of November, I believe. So I don't know what the updated status is on him. But that fourth line, because of that, is Alex Tessier, who's 21, Liam Foudy, who's 20, and Emil Bemstrom, who's 21. So just as many, if not more, questions about this forward group than the Panthers.
Yeah, and obviously the big jersey sales driver is going to be that addition of Max Domi, but I have a hard time picturing Max Domi and Cam Atkinson getting on the same page offensively. I just think their games don't really match, and we'll see if they can find some synergy where I can't envision it.
Now, defensively is where they shine, but again, it's kind of similar to Florida. I don't even know if I could call it better than Florida, though. Maybe in terms of name value for some people, but a top pair of Zach Werenski and Seth Jones, which is obviously great. From there, Vladislav Gavrikov, who is incredibly solid, but obviously still new to the league, with David Savard, who's also great. So I love that top four. But then we get to the third pairing of Michael Del Zotto and Dean Kukin. I like Dean Kukin a lot, but relying on Michael Del Zotto is an interesting call.
Yeah, it's been a while since Mike Del Zotto was a X factor on any team. He's going to be on a third pairing. This team has had a hard time with, like, I can't remember a time where any player on Columbus was a bad defenseman. And so I think Del Zotto is going to end up looking fine. Dean Kukin, I can't help but root for guys named Dean. There's just not enough of them.
Fair.
And I don't know, for some reason, and I know there's no science to this or whatever, but it seems like a Columbus jersey turns you into a better defenseman.
Well, you do have to factor in the Tortorella aspect of this here. And Del Zotto, I do believe, of course, formerly played under Tortorella. Del Zotto is someone who's willing to block a ton of shots. So it just kind of screams to me that Tortorella went with a safety blanket here, a safety net, rather than relying on Gabriel Carlson or Andrew Peeke, a younger defenseman in that lineup that's gotten some ice time in the past, or Scott Harrington, who's on the taxi squad making $1.6 million.
Gosh. That's pretty good taxi money.
Yeah, who also, I mean, both of those guys, Delzato and Harrington, both lefties, both left-handed shots. So it's an interesting one. But the other key aspect for me here is the goaltending. And it's Elvis Merzlikins and Joonas Korpisalo. Korpisalo's looked okay at times. He looked better last year. A lot of people will say you're crazy for not banking on him after the ridiculous overtime performance against Tampa. But at the end of the day, too, like I still have some doubts about him and Elvis Merzlikins. We only saw one season. He's got a new $4 million contract. I know he's on a defensive first team, Tortorella coach team, but there are just some question marks that I have here pretty much up and down the lineup. There's not, I mean, aside from the top four defense maybe, but there's not really one aspect as a whole, forward defense goaltending, that I can't say I don't have questions about.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, on paper, you've got two 26-year-old goaltenders that put up above a 9.40 in the playoffs. And of course, I will say those numbers are probably inflated by those insane overtime games. But, you got two solid goaltenders, you got solid defensemen, but the forward core is lacking. So you're going to need to play that game we talked about earlier, where it's just that's how Columbus is going to have to win. They're going to have to grind them out and pot a couple in.
So moving on to the playoff teams here, we only have 4 teams left to break down. I want to start things off with the one team that I kind of mentioned and alluded towards that I could see missing in favor of Florida or Columbus making it, and that's Nashville. And it might be controversial to have Nashville in a playoff spot because obviously they've torn down in some ways, but there's just something about them. They've entered that territory for me where I could see them making it or even finally putting it together. And some people might call that absurd, but let's break this down here. When you look at the forwards, keep in mind right now that Mikael Granlund is currently not being factored into their top 12 due to visa issues as well. Someone else who's yet to be able to come over. But a top line right now of Philip Forsberg, Ryan Johansen, and Victor Arvidsson. I really like the wingers. I don't know if you want to bank on Ryan Johansen still at this point, but he's making $8 million a season. You kind of have to hope that he's going to make it. You have a second line of Eric Haula, who I think is a good addition if he can stay healthy. Matt Duchene, who is as good as ever. And then the also previously aforementioned Luke Cunnin, who, I'm not a fan of the contract or the role that he's in, admittedly, but maybe that type of grit player next to 2 skill players is going to work out for them. Third line of Rocco Grimaldi, Colton Sissons, and Nick Cousins, which is solid for a third line. And then Ellie Tolvanen, Brad Richardson, and Calle Jarnkrok on the fourth line, which is interesting to me because you view Richardson as like a defensive first physical veteran at 35. Calle Jarnkrok, more, I don't know, at times, he's a solid two-way player, really fast, obviously. And then Ellie Tolvanen is someone, of course, that Preds fans had hopes for a long time. And it seems like we have quite a few rosters in the NHL, the Panthers included, where it's like, oh, here's this great young Finnish prospect. And a lot of teams are still waiting for those players to pan out. And Ellie Tolvanen is that particular guy on Nashville.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I look at this Nashville roster, let's hope Tolvanen does something because they need an injection of something new. I feel like it's been the same lineup year after year. They'll occasionally lose a guy here and there. And Johansen is definitely taking a step back. I don't even know if he's obviously a top 6 forward, but can he really hold down that top line? And I think it's unfortunate that top line didn't have that much chemistry with Duchene when they tried it out.
Yeah, and I mean, from there though, like the forwards, I have some questions about. Defensively, it's a little bit more set in stone here. A top pair of Roman Josi and Ryan Ellis, which might be the best defense pair in the league. You have Matthias Ekholm and Dante Fabro, which I really like. Again, Ekholm, someone who could easily be on a top pair on any other team, just about. And Fabro, 22 years old, still looking decent, getting used to the league. And then, honestly, a really solid third pairing, and Mark Borowiecki and Matt Benning. Of course, Borowiecki, somehow not the captain of the Senators. Still feel sorry for him getting trotted out there by Eugene Melnyk back in the day. But honestly, I like this defense core. It's tough to not like a D core that boasts 3 defensemen that are all top pair caliber that are making less than $19 million combined.
Yeah, that's nuts. That is an absolute fleece.
All of them 30 years old,
defense.
too, by the way. So it's not like a Brent Burns, Erik Karlsson situation where, not that Erik Karlsson's up there, but Brent Burns, of course, over 35.
Yeah, this is, I don't want to say it's the best D-core in the league, but you could make that argument.
I mean, you definitely could. I mean, that's pretty much the best way to phrase it here. And then goaltending as well. It might not be the best tandem in the league, but it's high quality for sure. Juuse Saros and Pekka Rinne. Now, Juuse Saros, of course, interesting because he's one of like 6 or 7 goaltenders that's 6 foot or under in this league, but he is someone who might have the claim for being the best of that bunch at just 25 years old. And then Pekka Rinne is 38 years old, but he has the Bobrovsky factor where if he's on, my God, is he on? There's a reason why the so hot right now memes are still a thing. But again, right now we really don't know what version of Pekka Rinne we're going to get. But I do like the fact that they have, kind of similar to Arizona, 2 goaltenders where if they're healthy and on their game, they have one of the best tandems in the league.
Yeah, that said, I mean, it is the Bobrovsky effect. I mean, the Bobrovsky comparison is definitely there with Rinne, especially because, the guy has had one bad season and a lot of people are ready to throw in the towel on him. I mean, he is 38 years old. I mean, but, it's like you said, Juuse Saros able to defy his height and is one of the better I would say, I'd go as far as say top 15 goaltenders in the league despite his height. So I don't know. I mean, Saros clearly the heir to the throne here. Does he end up seeing a majority of the starts this year? I think that's a possibility.
I think there's a pretty good chance at that too, yeah. So our final 3 teams here, we will save the other 2 for last year because they happen to be the teams that, of course, met in the Stanley Cup Finals. So let's go next up to the Carolina Hurricanes, who I do have making the playoffs here. Forward-wise, again, we'll start off there. Nino Niederreiter, Sebastian Aho, and Teuvo Teravainen on the top line, which is tremendous. A second line of Andrei Svechnikov, Vinny Trocheck, and Jesper Fast, who I think is pretty underrated. Warren Fogle, Jordan Stahl, and Martin Necas, and a fourth line of Ryan DeSingle, Jordan Martinook, and Brock McGinn. You get a little bit of everything with these lines. You get the skill, you get the two-way play, you get the physicality.
Yeah, I think when you're looking this over, it's really easy for the casual hockey fan to not realize how good Sebastian Aho is, not to beat the dead horse of him being underrated. But, he's legitimately a superstar, and he's the type of guy that drives a top line. And then when you've got 3 very well put together lines behind that, this forward core is a lot better than at first glance it looks on paper.
And you say that about the forward core, and then you get into the best part of this team, and that is the defense.
Oh, 100%.
Absolutely incredible defense core that they have here. A top pairing of Jacob Slavin and Dougie Hamilton, Brady Shea with Brett Pesce, and Jake Gardner with Hayden Fleury, while also having someone like Joakim Ryan, Jake Bean as well, currently on the taxi squad.
Yeah, this defense is insane. I mean, the only thing I could even say negative about this defense is at the end of this year, Dougie Hamilton's going to need to get paid.
Making just under $6 million now, and it's going to be just a little bit higher by the end of it. The big question mark, obviously, with this team is the goaltending. They're still going to be relying on Peter Mrazek and James Reimer. I guess I'd put Carolina, Nashville, Florida, and Columbus all in that one pile. I think I'd include Carolina in this just because I'm uncertain of the goaltending at times. But I felt, with the skaters that the Hurricanes happen to have, I feel a little bit more confident in picking them over Florida and Columbus. But hardly the worst defense tandem or goaltending tandem, I should say, in the league, but still worthy of a second look, I'd say.
Yeah, and I mean, when I've watched James Reimer play a lot of games, and he's the type of goalie that can single-handedly win you a game, and he's also the type of goalie that can single-handedly lose you a game. And I mean, that's the only thing this team's missing. I mean, they would be a surefire bet for the playoffs if they had a stable, reliable goaltender. I mean, they've got a platoon that I bet at some point we're going to end up seeing 3 and 4 members of, just because there is no stalwart netminder.
Yeah, I mean, Anton Forsberg's there. Alex Nedeljkovic was put on waivers in the past day or so. 25 years old. He's still yet to make it. So we'll see what happens with Carolina. But again, we have them in the playoffs, which brings us to our final two. And again, the Stanley Cup final matchup from this past fall. We'll start off with the runners-up, the Dallas Stars, who I can't help but have making the playoffs again here. Now, right now, obviously, the huge news with the Stars is it's not even worth looking at their cap-friendly depth chart because, again, out of, I believe, 27, was it, positive COVID tests throughout NHL training camps, I do believe it is 17 members of the Stars are currently out right now. That is on top of the injuries to Tyler Seguin with the labrum issue that he happened to have, that he had surgery on, and Ben Bishop also coming off of a knee surgery, I believe, that took place this past November. So it can be a little bit tough. I think Dallas, really, this Central Division, now that you look at it, now that we break it down, there are going to be good teams that miss the playoffs here. And it makes you wonder with everything that's going on with Dallas, and we'll get into trying to break down what this team looks like, but Dallas could be that team just due to a ridiculous amount of unfortunate circumstances. They could be the team that misses out.
Yeah, and you know what? If just Tyler Seguin was injured, I would say maybe they're the team that misses out. If just Ben Bishop was injured, I'd say maybe they're the team that misses out. With both of them, I still think they're going to make it, and I think that speaks to the quality of the other players on this team, but Dallas is not the same team without those two players. That's a giant loss.
Absolutely. So in an ideal world, the 12 forwards, I should say, would be Seguin, Ben, Pavelski, Radulov, obviously solid so far. Cogliano's not what he used to be. Radek Fax is solid. Rupe Hintz still looks to be getting better, as does Denis Gurianov. And then you get some decent options like Justin Dowling, Blake Como, Jason Dickinson as well, and then Yoel Kiviranta, who stepped up as well. So it's a respectable forward core. And defensively as well, it's honestly not that bad. Esa Lindell, of course, John Klingberg. Steven Johns is back and healthy. Jamie Alexiak, who, has his presence as well as one of the bigger defensemen in the league. Andre Sekera. Miro Heiskanen, of course, one of the best young defensemen in this league. And then from there, it's a bit of a crapshoot between former Panther Mark Pysyk, Taylor Fedun, and Julius Honka coming back over from Finland.
Yeah, with Pysyk, you got to ask the question, are they going to play him at forward? Or are they going to play him at defense?
Depends on the amount of COVID troubles, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's the value of a player like Pysyk. Miro Heiskanen, he's going to Miro Heiskanen. He's going to put up points where you need him. This is a really good defense core. I mean, it's a little bit more offensively minded than I think is good, but this team made it Stanley Cup final for a reason.
And then obviously the goaltending in an ideal world is Ben Bishop and Anton Khudobin. Bishop, when healthy, one of the best goalies in the league, although last season, a lot of Stars fans I know that I talked to had the concerns of just having no faith in Ben Bishop. So you have to wonder if those concerns were due to the injury that we might not have known was as bad at the time. Anton Khudobin put this team on his back, got him to a cup final. It's one of the better tandems in the league when they're healthy and on top of their game.
Yeah, and I think Khudobin is significantly better than people give him credit for. He's one of those guys where he's never been a true starter anywhere he's been, and he has always put up great numbers.
Yeah, I got to see him a lot in Boston as well, and obviously was very happy when he was the backup here, and for good reason. So at the moment, on paper, Dallas makes the playoffs, but that is a team certainly to keep an eye on heading throughout the season. And then, funny how this worked out, Deej, we do get to the Tampa Bay Lightning, the reigning, defending Stanley Cup champions. And again, we have them making the playoffs despite the obvious exception of Nikita Kucherov being out for the regular season. But this forward group is so stacked. Andre Palat, Braden Point, and Steven Stamkos on the top line is disgusting, especially if Stammer's healthy. Kaloran, Cirelli, and Matthew Joseph on the second line. Joseph might be a little bit out of place, but we'll see if he can kind of play up to the other two's level. Barclay Goodrum, Yanni Gordon, Blake Coleman on the third line is phenomenal. And then Patrick Maroon, Mitch Stevens, and Alex Volkov as well, another younger player getting a chance here. The incredible amount of star power that they still have, despite the absence of Kucherov, is staggering.
How do they keep getting away with it?
It's a meme come to life. It really is.
They just, I mean, it's insane. They have some of the best cap circumvention, without saying it in terms of like, you know, they should be penalized for it. They know how to handle the cap. They know how to convince their players to sign team-friendly deals. They know how to develop talent. It's disgusting. That's what it is.
Yeah. And I mean, defensively as well, the pieces are still in place. And again, you're talking about a team that has Tyler Johnson on the taxi squad due to cap implications. But defensively as well, Victor Hedman and the returning Jan Ruda, who probably not who you want in your first pair, but I mean, certainly if you're working with Victor Hedman, you're probably going to look better or maybe significantly worse. Second pair, Ryan McDonough and Cal Foote has made this roster from the looks of it, and Mikhail Sergachev on the third pair with Eric Chernak, which is just disgusting. Like, that is an incredible third pair, and again, just the embarrassment of riches that Tampa has on full display there.
Yeah, I mean, Mikhail Sergachev, I can't believe he's only 22 years old. Looking at this roster right now, that's insane to me. Like, I mean, I realized he was traded for recently, but he took such a huge step forward last year. I mean, Victor Hedman's the best defenseman in the league. I mean, I'll argue that point all day. And it's just, there's just so much. There's so many players on here that would be on the top line of any other club, and so many players that can make a difference. Like, we could do an entire episode just on the Tampa Bay Lightning. It's nuts. And this is a team that they lost their best players injured, and they're still the Stanley Cup favorites.
Yeah, and I mean, goaltending wise as well, then you get to Andrei Vasilevsky and Curtis McElhinney. McElhinney, despite being 37, still a very solid backup. Vasilevsky making $10 million now, or just about $9.5 million. I'll say this. I know I have a controversial opinion here based off of some of the stats that I've seen, where I don't necessarily think he's the best goaltender in the league right now, like a lot of people do. You look at some of the numbers, and you could come to the conclusion that he is a really good goalie who might be carried a little bit by the system and the team in front of him. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if he's the best in the world, does it? He's a Stanley Cup winning goaltender, and he still has an incredible team in front of him.
Yeah, and regardless of if he's a product of the system or if he really is just that good of a goalie, which he might be, I mean, how many goalies have put up under 2 GAA in the playoffs, playing in all 25 games? And that's the thing. I think when I think of how good is Andrei Vasilevsky, I think about how difficult he is to beat in the shootout. When he's removed from that system and the defense, I really, truly believe that Vasilevsky is that good. I don't believe he's the best goalie in the league, but I think he's top 3 without a doubt.
I mean, it's funny you mention it now. I'm looking it up in terms of the goals against average in the playoffs here, and I'm not sure what the cutoff happens to be. And again, with Vasilevsky, like you said, he was at a 1.9. I'm on Quant Hockey of all things. Now, granted, this is, I believe, career numbers instead of single season. Let me see if I can look up single season here. And indeed, I can. And let me tell you, there aren't too many goalies, actually, that have put up at least modern era under a 2.0. I mean, unless it's something ridiculous. And like you said, the 25 game factor as well. Like, the lowest number I can see in the modern era is Marty Turco in 06-07. He had a 952 save percentage and a 1.3 GAA, but he only played 7 games. So you're looking at someone like Jonathan Quick in 11-12 during that cup run, who in 20 games had a 1-4-1 and a 196. And again, that playoff run from Jonathan Quick is the reason why there is going to be the debate that he is Hall of Fame caliber or not. Like off of that alone, he's been able to ride that. So again, there aren't too many goalies, like you said, who have been able to do what he did this past offseason or postseason, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can argue that he's a combination of a product of his system and just an extremely rare talent.
The Tom Brady of the NHL.
Andrei Vasilevsky.
Oh, God. Does he have a son?
I'm sure he does.
One of these days, the internet will find out if he kisses his son on the mouth, and that'll be debated for the rest of time, as much as whether or not he's the best quarterback or goaltender of all time. Deej, can you believe it? We have made it through all 31 teams.
We have. And it turns out he does have a son named Lucas. I looked it up real quick. Lucas Vasilevsky.
Well, everybody feel free to make presumptions if you care to.
Yeah, we've made it through all 31 teams. This will be the last time we go through all 31 teams because soon we will have to go through 32.
Indeed, the Seattle Kraken. That's, I think, one of the most intriguing things, of course, that's, looking ahead. Obviously, the implications as well, not just of like, okay, COVID's here and we're still going to try to make this happen, but obviously the Seattle Kraken expansion draft coming up as well this year. It's been an incredible 10 months in the world of hockey, and it's only going to get more ridiculous as we go along here.
Yeah, and, I think this has been one of the weirdest free agent markets I can remember. And I think that isn't entirely because of the pandemic. I think Seattle's shadow is looming. I think a lot of teams had something to learn from the Vegas draft. A lot of teams made mistakes. I'm looking at Florida. And I think that teams want to be careful right now with Seattle coming in. I think this next offseason, we're going to see a lot more crazy signings.
Yeah, I mean, you factor in with that Vegas expansion, some of these teams that should have known better and some of the other teams that just, weren't really thinking like, oh, yeah, we're going to have Vegas be a factor here and the cap's going to be this by the time that happens. Like, obviously those contracts weren't really thought of, but we've known for a while, of course, that Seattle was going to be here. So the teams have had that extra bit of planning, and now they've had that learning opportunity from that first expansion draft just a few years ago.
Oh, yeah. And I don't think Seattle is going to end up being as successful as the Knights, but I think it's important to see that Seattle is very likely going to be walking into a very weak division because they'll likely be placed with 3 California teams that are not in a great spot.
Yeah, I mean, there is a really good opportunity there. Arizona will be getting moved over to the normal Central Division when that happens as well. So, tremendous opportunity for them, like you said, once they enter the league. So, just way too many talking points coming up about this upcoming season.
So, I will say, to finish out this season preview, after we've gone through all these players, who do you think is going to be the weirdest to see in a different jersey?
God, offhand, Joe Thornton was the first name that came to mind.
Yeah, for me, it's either going to be Joe Thornton or Mikko Koivu. I think those two are the real bizarre ones. Because of all the guys that changed teams this offseason, I think very few of them were essentially the face of the franchise for a while, like they were.
Alex Pietrangelo comes to mind too now, especially with the new alternate and reverse retro that Vegas has. That's going to be an interesting look for him too. He would have worn red one way or another though, with the Blues reverse retro, of course, also being a disgusting shade of red.
Can't escape it. All right, so let's see. All right, so let's give out 2 preseason awards, right?
Sure.
Okay, so what team? We'll start by, before we end on a positive note, we'll say what team has gotten what team has become the most bad from what they were before? What's the word I'm looking for here?
What team has regressed the most?
Thank you. Yeah, what team has regressed the most from the offseason?
The first two teams that come to mind for me were Chicago and Vancouver.
Interesting. Yeah,
simply because I think like New Jersey was already kind of in that rough spot, so the additions on defense and then the loss of Crawford kind of offset, and I feel like they're in the same spot. Chicago right now, it's because of their injuries, and Vancouver, obviously, you lose Markstrom, Tanev as well. The Travis Hamonic signing became official while we were recording this, so those are the first two teams that come to mind.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'd agree with those. I think this has been a very short offseason, so there wasn't enough time for teams to fall apart.
That's fair.
The way there normally is. Okay, most improved team.
Ooh, most improved. Taking a look up and down the options here. I think I have to go with Toronto or Vegas. I feel like Toronto, with the addition of Brody and some of the other changes that they've made, Vegas adding Pietrangelo, those are the two teams, at least, that come to mind. Winnipeg as well. Montreal, though, I think it's impossible to not shout out Montreal because you factor in if Josh Anderson does well. Tyler Toffoli was added. Romanov, joining in from within. I don't think Edmonton's going to be this gigantic player for them, but those are the teams that come to mind. So the Canadian teams did quite well, I would say, this offseason.
I think one of the reasons that I don't put Vegas on that level as most improved is, although they did add Pietrangelo, they had to subtract Nate Schmidt to get there.
Fair.
And although Pietrangelo is a better defenseman than Nate Schmidt, I think it's a matter of how much better.
That's fair, especially if you compare Toronto going from like Cody Ceci to TJ Brody. That's a fair assessment.
Yeah, that's a complete turnaround. So maybe Freddie Anderson will actually get something that can block a puck in front of him.
Maybe. Or at least not send a grenade up the middle of the ice and just be like, oh shit, let's see how this plays out.
Let's see. Any other notes going into this season that you can think of?
Oh, do we steal the question that the Steve Dangle podcast gets often throughout their season and make our prediction of, now granted, we do know for a fact it's northeast, west, and central in terms of the bracket sides. Obviously, with the way the playoffs are, do we say who we think will be in the Final Four, the one team from each division, or do we just outright say who we think will be in the Cup final as our day before the season starts, or at least when this podcast goes up, the day of the season beginning prediction? Which one do you think?
I say we do both. I say we get our Final Four and the two that make it.
Okay, so again, just to get the clarification here, if we look at the NHL playoffs, I just want to make sure 100% that we don't screw this up and that it is those divisions as well that face each other, because it might be the North versus the West. And I just want to make sure, because the final four teams that advance to the semifinal will be reseeded. So there is no Eastern Conference versus Western Conference championship format this year as well. So I'm just trying to take a look here at what this is. It's kind of a tough call about what these divisions are going to be here in terms of who's going to play one another. So I guess if it's going to be reseeded, it's a complete toss-up on who's going to play who in the Final Four. So that makes it pretty damn difficult actually to predict this year. Because the Final Four teams in the semifinal would be a 1v4 or 2v3 based on regular season points. So you essentially have to pick who you think the top team from each division will be and who will be the best in the regular season to decide who your 1v4, 2v3 would be.
Yeah, I think we should just do 4 and then our cup winner in that case then, because of this reseeding that I'm sure we'll endlessly hear the announcers talk about as the playoffs start.
Right. So my top 4, my champions of the North Division, into the semifinals of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So in the Final Four, I think we are going. I can't believe I'm saying this. Again, we're guaranteed a Canadian team in the Final Four. I think Toronto does it. Now that they don't have to make their way past Boston, past Tampa, I think Toronto makes it into the Final Four. I don't just want to stick with who I thought the top four would be because you want to factor in upsets, but I'm going to go with Toronto. I'm going to go with Colorado. I think, despite predicting Vegas would win the division, I think Colorado, especially if they can stay healthy, which was their big issue last year, I think they have enough to make it. So it's going to be Toronto and Colorado. From the Central, I have Tampa making it. And from the East, oh God, I'm going to go with Philly. I predicted the Bruins to be able to make it back to the Cup final last year, and then they ran into that Tampa buzzsaw. But ultimately, I think I am, with the exception of Vegas, going to go with my division winners. So let's just say, in theory, in terms of regular season success, I guess it would be, God, who the hell would even be the 1 through 4 seed if it's Toronto, Colorado, Tampa, and Philly? I mean, it's a complete toss-up on who you think would have the majority of the points. Let's go with a Final Four of Colorado and Toronto. Colorado is the 1 seed. Colorado wouldn't be the 1 seed, wouldn't they? Because they have Vegas winning the division. Let's go.
Yeah, I guess Tampa would probably be the 1 seed.
Let's go Tampa, Colorado, Toronto, and Philadelphia. As ridiculous as that is. So Tampa, Colorado, Toronto, Philadelphia. A Stanley Cup final of Tampa Bay and Philadelphia, with the Tampa Bay Lightning repeating as Cup champions.
Okay. All right, so I could see that happening. I mean, I think Philadelphia is definitely a hot hand this year. All right, so here we go. I think from the North, I think we're going to see Winnipeg. I think Winnipeg is finally going to live up to their potential. I think even though their defense has been all over the place, I think it's finally going to come together. I think we're going to see Hellebuck put together a Vezina season. I think Patrick Laine he's going to do what we're all expecting him to do, which is to absolutely ball out in a contract year. He just seems like that type of guy. So I think Winnipeg's going to come out of the North. I think looking at the West, I want to say Colorado, but I think my heart's going to say St. Louis. I think St. Louis is going to put it together. I think Mike Hoffman's going to be a fantastic replacement for Tarasenko. It's all going to come together for St. Louis. I think in the Central, I think Tampa is going to take a step back. They're still going to be elite all year. I think Dallas is going to have their losses come and get to them. I think Carolina is going to come out of the Central this year.
Ooh, hot take.
I mean, after seeing Carolina on paper, though, they have all the pieces in place to finally really throttle it.
See, I like that, though, because I kind of went with some of the safe bets, and I like that you're going with some of the out-of-the-box picks that I didn't have the balls to make.
And then in the East, I think, I really want to agree with you on Philadelphia. But for whatever reason, I feel like Pittsburgh's going to do something weird this year. I think if we get a full healthy year of Jake Gensel, I mean, that team looks amazing. I don't know how they got out of all their bad trades. I think Chris Letang is due to have a good season one of these years. I mean, Tristan Jarry, I think this could be his year. So I think it's either going to be Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. Carter Hart's just too good, so I'll say Philadelphia. I really wanted to say Pittsburgh, but I can't have too many hot takes, so we'll go with Philadelphia.
Then
so let's see. We'll
deciding who is 1 through 4 based on regular season points from those 4 teams.
All right, so Philadelphia 1 seed, St. Louis 2 seed, Winnipeg 3 seed, Carolina 4 seed. So we'll get Philadelphia, Carolina, St. Louis, Winnipeg. Then we'll have a we'll have a final of St. Louis, Carolina, and I think Carolina wins a cup.
Ooh, some hot takes. I like it. I go for the easy pick of the repeat. Deej going for Carolina. I like it.
Yeah, I just, I mean, I'm trying to ignore the success and failures teams had last year, and I keep going back to the way this Carolina team looks on paper. It's nuts. I mean, all they need is for one of their two goalies to play well for 50 games.
It's true.
And they're done. I mean, yeah, that's nuts.
I mean, put it this way, again, it's not every season that the favorite ends up winning. When Washington won, everyone's like, they're cooked. It's not going to happen at this point. When St. Louis won, of course, they went from worst in the league in January to winning the cup in 7. So, it's not to say, I mean, that the favorite always wins. They did this year with Tampa, but who knows what could happen? I mean, they do have some depth, but could easily not come together for them.
Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be such a weird season.
So excited for it, though.
I really am, too. I really hope the NHL app comes out on PS5 tomorrow. I'm going to be so mad if it doesn't. I'm going to have to, go take my Fire Stick out of the room, plug it in exclusively to watch hockey.
Oh, boy.
All right. I think that does it for a season preview.
I would hope so. We covered every team in some moderate detail at the least. I don't think anybody can complain about, you didn't talk about our team enough.
I think we're definitely going to get a lot of hate mail for not having Toronto win the cup.
Probably. That's to be expected.
But it'll never happen.
Oh, God, never once.